and down.
He was falling. He was rising. An unyielding force, pulling at his every seam, though never threatening to rip him apart or harm him, as he danced elegantly through the dark of night.
No.
There was only the brisk evening air so high up, caressing the angel's newfound wings and locks of silver hair, the obsidian armor he donned moments ago now long forgotten. And so the beguiling entity moved, choreographing a well-crafted ballet up in the heavens, a dance of swirling white robes and gently rustling feathers of the finest alabaster. The divine one finally came to a stop, arms spread wide, silently hovering above the somber land that was now so far below, a wavering stare shifting focus between the wide-open awning of constellations above and the darkened horizon, so far away. Where did the sky end and the earth begin anew? When would the sun broach the horizon and bring with it its delightful energy? Would he still be here then, to witness such a view? When had he began smiling? When had he began crying? Eyes of brilliant cerulean, ever shifting, ever changing, stared at the luminous heavens above. The angel's eyes shone, ephemeral shocks of golden nebulae swirled and morphed within his icy blue gaze, akin to an enrapturing billow of interstellar clouds, so otherworldly in their nature. No longer were the skies overcast, obscured by a dull gray coating or colored by some blanket of toxic smog. Instead, as if to match the allure of his gaze, a finely sewn blanket of constellations punctuated by a pale moon decorated the darkened sky above, a sight beyond mortal scope bearing down on him, crushing the angel with the weight of the world. The amalgamation finally caught up. An archdevil with the wings of a bat and the head of a toad, its ungodly appearance heavily contrasting with the divine sight that was the angel's weightless dance moments prior. Previously too taken by the sight of his perfect master's glee, the devil finally dared approach, now mutely awaiting his errant god's orders with unmatched patience. Nothing was said, for no words were needed. Merely the gentle din of rushing winds, with no cover to break it, filled the space between them. The devoted archdevil looked once more upon his unmatched master, wandering but not lost, isolated but not alone, contemplative but not stumped. His master stood upon the air, gravity but an inconsequential suggestion that had long since been brushed aside. Pale ivory feathers, shed from the most dignified of wings, drifted down like gentle snowfall, the angel standing with his arms wide open, as if he embraced the entire world at once. The being's form stood clear, so small against the backdrop of a measurable scale, still he bore a weighty reality that drew the eye. Brightly silver robes fluttered gently in the wind, giving motion to a spellbinding painting that had come alive. Brilliant, exalted, eminence made flesh. An unmoving, unyielding force unmatched in power that was content to simply remain there. Demiurge. The angel spoke, his regally dulcet tones echoed, a smooth voice with but the slightest rasp near the end, but still gentle like the caress of silky cloth or a refreshing summer breeze upon the skin. The archdevil shivered at the kindly saccharine voice, which tickled the spine of whoever heard it. "I am at your service, my lord." The demon returned, fervor evident. The divine being turned his attention to his devout follower. The devil, who upon seeing how his master's eyes, beautiful as they were, glistened, began to fret. "It's breathtaking, is it not?" The angel drawled, almost lackadaisically gesturing towards the sky that was embellished with bright stars and faraway celestial hazes. "Indeed it is, my lord," the devoted devil replied breathlessly, a bit too taken aback to offer any meaningful insight. The entity gave a mirthful chuckle at his stumped delivery. "And yet, you seem not entirely convinced." The divine being teased, appearing to be once more on the brink of joyous laughter, a sound the archdevil has come to associate with a soothing calm that no natural force could instill. "If you claim it to be beautiful, then that must be the case, my lord." Your word is absolute law, nothing short of it. For but the briefest of moments, the devil was almost certain that a slight grimace had marred the angel's alluring face before he schooled it back into a gently smiling mask. Another beat of silence followed, before the veritable god returned his focus to the ever-silent night sky. This, the divine being began. Truly, this world is a box of jewels. The angel's declaration trailed off, as the devil tilted his head at his master's musings. Unblemished, untainted, untouched. The archdevil watched in awe as his glorious master seemed to reach for the heavenly canopy, his 3 pairs of brilliant ashen wings spreading wide. All while the ornate golden halo that hovered above his head hummed, showering the immediate surroundings with a gentle light. One could simply reach out and have it all to oneself. And terse pause punctuated his sentence. Though that might be a little haughty, no? Demiurge paused. It seemed quite possible indeed for the ultimate master to do such a thing, to simply snatch the very stars from their lofty perch. I assure you that it is anything but haughty, my lord. The demon rebutted. This world, and all of the stars that decorate its skies, should belong to your supreme self, if anybody at all. It was the truth. The only truth that mattered, and the only truth that even existed. All of Nazarick would toil to see their masters will through to the end, a fact that the devil wished to outwardly declare, but not yet. Not in this somber moment. The angel tittered in an almost playful manner. With one quick yet august motion, a genteel hand was run through his pristine ashen locks, brushing aside whatever tufts of hair that had gotten in the way. Blazing eyes of azure befitting of a chthonic god bore into Demiurge's hovering form, his gaze vivid and somehow physically suffocating. Neither judgmental nor vehement, merely pondering, if not a little curious, but undoubtedly intelligent to a dangerous degree. Once again, the devil failed to repress a chill, brought about by equal parts fear and reverence. Small moments as this gave insight into his master's true nature as something quite far from holy. When the consoling effect of the being's mere presence gave way to the dread of being silently dissected by a mind far superior, an entity capable of darkness beyond meager demons. There is something on your mind, he spoke once more. I wish to hear it. My lord. Speak. The angel requested. Or perhaps it was a veiled command, its force masked by such a softly beguiling voice. It was as if the divine being had discerned the devil's desire to serve, to bring him the very heavens in a gift basket. The Supreme One wished to hear it, his conviction. For the archdevil to put on display his willingness to serve, to dress the angel's absolute form with a quilt of interwoven stars, to extol promises of loyalty, when the rest of Nazarick was not present to do so. Promise me. Adore me. Serve me. Speak freely. Unspoken orders or unspoken requests. The archdevil would grant these wishes all the same, in the name of his master, an entity with sharp tongue and sharper wit, it seemed. Of course, my lord, Demiurge exclaimed. All of Nazarick exists for the sole purpose of fulfilling your supreme desires. Your sublime self need only issue the command. And so the devil obliged. He sang his master's praises to his heart's content, promising and intending to deliver the entire world upon a silver platter. The angel silently looked on, the barest hint of a smile pulling on his face. A smile so joyous, yet so melancholic. So warm, yet so distant. So proud, yet so defeated. So fulfilled, yet so tired. Did the angel dream of his old comrades, the other creators? Demiurge wondered. And there they stood upon the air. Far above the earth, the night growing older still. Angel and demon. The latter looked upon the former, admiring their presence. Their power, how, even in a place so mystical, they remained the most captivating of sights. The future path was not yet clear to even his bright mind, though the devil harbored no doubts. This world was not prepared. And looking upon the angel, he wondered if that was what it meant to be supreme. Guildmaster of Ainz, Seraphim's dread. Unholy scholar of the divine. Crimson king in purest ivory. Leader of the 41 supreme beings. Momonga. Chapter 1. Something divine. The world, more bleary than it had ever been, slowly came back into focus, with an indiscernible array of shapes dancing across his vision. Each fractal, each shaft of light, slowly morphing and shifting, warped by the tears forming in misty eyes, until they could take that last step into absolute clarity with but a blink. It was in such a manner that Suzuki Satoru was roused from a restless, dreamless sleep, a sleep that brought no comfort, and a sleep that only seemed to have made him more tired still. What his vision discerned was wholly illogical, an impossibility. Instead of a faded concrete ceiling, cracked from decades of wear and tear, decorated by mildew, the sight that met his eyes was not of something so decrepit, being instead a finely made baldachin of an unknown, but surely expensive, make. Nor was the man's surroundings in line with his expectations either, standing head and shoulders above even the most expensively comfortable living spaces of Earth. Though with the remaining mists of sleep being staved off by the rapid reemergence of his consciousness, it was not difficult to recall how this may not be Earth anymore. With a barely audible groan brought about by being reminded of his current situation, the nervous wreck of a man slowly sat up from his less-than-supreme sleeping position. Though perhaps this statement wasn't accurate anymore. What may have once been the human salaryman, exhausted from an unwavering onslaught of work-related stresses, was normal no longer. Instead, it would have been far more accurate to say that Momonga, the supreme being, had sat up in his bed. Or that somebody pretending to be a supreme being was sitting up in the supreme being's bed. It was certainly more fitting, matching up with Momonga's current mindset at the very least. It would be no exaggeration to say that things had gone downhill in record time. Though Suzuki was used to things possibly breaking down during work, this entire supernatural ordeal has been an endurance test in the smallest sense of the word. "I'm still here, it seems," the ex-human noted blearily. And it had only been 3 days. Each time he went to that overly opulent bed of his, Momonga had half expected to wake up in his DVR interface recovering from some nano-machine-induced coma. Thankfully, no such luck. Without so much as a warning, the salaryman had been ripped from his old responsibilities and placed in charge of a job far more comfortable, albeit significantly more stressful. How he was supposed to last several lifetimes, or eternity for that matter, was anybody's guess at this point. And that was a mere 3 days ago, when he had first arrived, confused beyond words and more than struck dumb by the ridiculous situation he had found himself in. Not that the concept of isekai was completely unknown to Suzuki Satoru, but the genre had been considered mostly dead for the past century, no more than an idea best left unacknowledged. Save. For Lucy Fur's caffeinated rants whenever the man went beyond monosyllabic grunts or other long-winded tirades. With a heavy sigh, the fallen angel's face contorted to reflect a dissatisfied frown. As such, Momonga briefly considered clutching his head in despair while his mind was going through the available options, though the idea of someone being there to witness such a pathetic display was too pressing. At this point, his stomach was doing backflips in his guts, not helped by how he had forcefully knocked himself unconscious with a sleep spell the previous night, leaving the Overlord feeling more groggy than refreshed. Am I going to have to keep this up? His addled mind wondered, the unfamiliar situation not doing his slowly growing paranoia any favors. It goes without saying that simple constructs with nothing more than fluff text to dictate their personalities coming alive as fully sentient beings was a worrying situation. The Supreme One's perfectly groomed silver eyebrows knitted together ever so slightly, lending his alluring face a hint of hesitation and concern. Yeah, I can't trust the NPCs as things are right now. They seemed loyal enough, I guess. But how long will that last? Will they turn on me if I let slip that I'm just some guy? That idea brought the perturbed angel no peace, his already frayed bundle of nerves being accentuated by the slightly unstable nature of his current form. The possibility exists for all I know. Another sigh was held back. This charade must go on. Maybe I should amass scrolls, items, anything I can get my hands on. In case a revolt does happen, I'll be ready. No weaknesses to be revealed, me. The exhausted Supreme being idly scratched his head before standing up. As his dark thoughts faded, a sense of comfort took hold, brought about by finally being allowed some room without the bed cramping him. He smiled for the first time since he had awoken, finally able to let go of his concerns, if only for a moment. Comfortable and cashmere soft, the bed was luxurious to be sure, but still felt a little limiting for a race with wings, even if they had been supernaturally stowed away until further ado. Fists clenched and unclenched as his biceps curled. The monstrous grip of his made the sound of creaking leather as he did so. If Suzuki Satoru had to point out one silver lining specifically, it would be this newfound body of his. It was a lean and muscular body, to say the least. Neither imposing nor diminutive, instead riding the fine line between thin and beefy without fully committing to either side. To that end, a comparison could be made, with his physique resembling a particularly flattering statue of some obscure Olympian god, one wrought from the finest marble by a master craftsman so skilled that they had practically been sprung from their mother's womb with a chisel in hand. Where Suzuki was pallid, Momonga was fair. Where Suzuki was scrawny, Momonga was slim. Where Suzuki was weak, Momonga was merely gentle. Where Suzuki had grease, Momonga had luster. I suppose that all the time spent in the character creator did end up paying off, if only in the weirdest way possible. With a sparse grin on his perfectly supple lips, the fallen angel took a deep breath, savoring the richly sweet air, serenely noting how pleasant it was. He may have been deep underground, far removed from the wide-open wilds of the world above, but the atmosphere here tasted no less like victory. It was a blessing of the highest form, if one were to consider this sudden turn of events as such, to have a body not turning gangrenous from the inside courtesy of toxic smog. Not one aspect of his current angelic body felt unnatural, with Suzuki feeling almost far more at ease with it than the faint human frame he had been saddled with up until this point. Still wearing a smirk on his face, the Supreme Being took a step forward only for his feet to not meet any ground. Right. He fumbled, glad that nobody had seen him basically trip over the very air. Being the highest tier Angela player could become meant that Momonga's natural way of traversing the world was to weightlessly float around a foot off the ground, unbound by gravity. An instinct that seemed to have integrated itself into him without much fuss. As such, the Supreme Being had started to subconsciously hover when he flexed his body a bit, akin to how newborns tend to grasp at things without being taught to do so. Momonga's previously effortless smile pulled into a more troubled expression at the reminder that even something as basal as this had changed. He barely even noticed the slightest tug that came on some metaphysical level as he looked at the now distant ground with pursed lips. Almost as if responding to his innermost thoughts, the angelic features that had been hidden away to allow for comfortable sleep flickered back to life, nearly causing the overlord to jolt. It feels so natural that I keep forgetting it, the fallen angel noted with a grimace, doing a good job keeping his mental size from slipping out. It began in a spot diagonally above and tilted slightly behind his head. Light began to warp around a point, an event horizon, as if an infinitesimal object with immeasurable mass had suddenly intersected with this plane of existence. The distortion grew as rays of divine light began flowing from that compressed point, dancing and interweaving into an ornately decorated laurel wreath. The massive halo of the finest gold erupted the breach. Not long after, the warped and misshapen space from whence the halo came closed up, allowing the brilliant ellipse to grow. Slowly, the ethereal circlet spun, flowing gold transmogrifying and growing with each revolution, expanding until reaching a crescendo when it nearly matched the size of its holder's body. And there it sat, slowly rotating, the room now bathed in a gentle golden light that could only be described as something holy. The crown of light in question was ornate, decorated with countless runes, carvings, engravings, and depictions of what looked to be ancient mythology. If one looked closely enough, perhaps a fanciful story could be gleaned from it. Momonga allowed his expression to slacken a little, cautiously observing his new addition. So familiar and so alien at the same time. It's natural when it comes on out, but I just can't get used to it when I try to get a feel for this thing. It's like a strand of hair or a nail. With much deliberation, the best comparison the Overlord could make was that of a Baroque chakram taking on the generalized shape of a cartoon sun. If said chakram was the most expensive, gaudy piece of art in the world. He thanked the stars that these things kinda just go away whenever he tries to make himself comfortable. Sleeping with an indestructible golden halo nearly as big as yourself wasn't exactly optimal. Ever so slightly browbeaten, the fallen angel frowned. Had he still been a human, or anybody other than himself for that matter, the over-the-top presentation lent itself well to claims of sanctity, making it easy to believe him to be some manner of deity under the wrong light, especially with the overwhelming regal aura given off by this form. But, alas, the Supreme Being was currently inside his own head, and he sure as hell wasn't fooling himself, even if the added confidence would have been appreciated. More of the angel's racial traits awoke from the slumber he had forcefully put himself in. 3 pairs of white wings burst from his back, nearly knocking over a vase in the process. Pure feathers of impossible magnificence filled the air, slowly drifting towards the ground like gentle snowfall. The slight delay made possible due to the transformative properties of the angel race no longer being a simple on-off button. It was as if someone had blown up a mountain of pillows, an observation that seemed to stave off a bit of his ill humor. Against his better judgment, the angel snatched a feather out of the air as it cascaded down. So soft. He bent it and pulled at it, testing the feather's tensile strength before rubbing it against his face. Tough, too. Man, my feathers would make for an awesome pillow. Now that the room is covered in them, maybe I should try it? Surely Nazarick has a seamstress or something similar. Momonga's mouth was pressed into a thin line. I could technically pull the I'm your boss card to get it done, assuming I am able to keep it together for that long. Good Lord, he was getting distracted already. And who could blame him? For a mundane office worker, everything here would be brand new and exciting, though that was no excuse when he had pressing matters to attend to. All right. Right. The nervous wreck chanted internally, his silver hair seeming less stylishly messy and more disheveled with each passing moment. Gotta look my very best. Can't appear weak or imperfect in this critical moment. Momonga hovered toward the mirror in the room, intending to adjust his visage accordingly. And when he arrived, he noted that it still took a fair bit to get used to his new reflection. The guildmaster saw his platinum white hair, which almost seemed to shift and dance like a living flame in a gentle breeze. Sky blue eyes with golden highlights peered back at him from within the reflection, occasionally flickering between other shades of brilliant blue, while the shocks of gold seemingly glowed stronger in response to his distress. With a single snap of his fingers, luxurious clothes were pulled from beyond the veil, covering the overlord's lean body. He inspected his own reflection in the mirror again, this time taking into consideration general appearances. Though Momonga's angelic form was undoubtedly a man, there certainly was a softer touch to it, a more feminine side, if you must. As such, he appeared to be fairly androgynous at a distance. Though, upon closer inspections, he definitely leaned more towards JRPG pretty boy than anything else, with more delicate and dainty qualities to go around. Momonga groaned as he massaged his eyes, simmering with annoyance. His avatar's design, along with Pandora's actor, were things he had come to despise over the years, not that it was anything inherently wrong with them. Suzuki realized that his tastes had just changed a bit, but this was still quite weird. At least he could cope with Pandora's actor. But seeing this face in the mirror all the time? I never thought I would feel so insecure about my masculinity. My old looks? Maybe. But not masculinity. Huh. At least Byukubu Kagama seemed to be really into this avatar. His current feelings weren't even brought about by his own tastes, but rather Peroroncino and Olbert's endless teasing over the better part of a decade. Even Suzuki realized that, given time, he'd likely be quite okay with his appearance. The Supreme Being blinked as the light of his halo reflecting off the mirror which, along with his 3 pairs of overlarge wings, served as stark and thoroughly unsubtle reminders that, in spite of his look, he wasn't human anymore, but rather a fallen angel, or an angel of sin, as it were. What an utterly ridiculous thing it was, now that he heard himself think it out loud. Each time he attempted to wrap his head around it, it was as if his sane mind rejected the notion of this happening. A perfectly smooth hand traced an equally smooth jawline, as Momonga's forehead creased when thinking of the possibilities. At least he'd have some basic knowledge about his current anatomy, even if he very well could have ended up as some wildly different race. Such as an undead, which probably could have happened. Though it was a long time ago now, he died a lot at the hands of human PKs early on in the game, almost to the point that Suzuki had thought of abandoning Yggdrasil altogether. It very nearly ended up happening, but the office worker knuckled down and decided to give it another shot. Since he was constantly being hounded for playing as an ugly undead, logic dictated that he should try something new. Though he may have ended up becoming a victim of coarse overcorrection, ending up an angel instead. It goes without saying that, stubborn as he was, Momonga wasn't quite willing to just give up on his dreams of a pure necromancy character, though his priorities inevitably began to tip. Among the various possible subclasses of angels was the fallen angel, specializing in dark, unholy magic rather than the alternative. And so, Momonga had ended up creating his role-playing build of a death angel. Of course, nothing in life is easy, least of all attempting to make a proper build in an incredibly poorly balanced game. Though the wide variety builds available in the game were plentiful, Yggdrasil was not flexible enough to make them all viable. So, torn between practicality and a dream build, the already overworked salaryman felt increasingly torn on what he wanted his character to be, both in terms of build and roleplay. Needless to say, he ended up as a grab bag of a character. It wasn't until the musings of Bellriver, with his own jack-of-all-trades build, and Tabulous Smaragdina, with his bloody Gatmo fetish, that the freshly crowned leader of Ainz Olgaun had decided on a more unambiguous direction to take his avatar. Perhaps it wasn't a wise thing taking character advice from the weakest combat-oriented member of the guild, but hey, that's what Momonga ended up doing. Sure, his combative power suffered initially, but having some actual direction in life, was a nice change of pace. With the primary purpose of his avatar being to masquerade as something more accepted in the community and to be borderline fujoshi bait, with his appearance, the character of Momonga appeared pure, holy, and angelic, despite being one half-assed stone toss away from registering as a subclass of demon. Hey, we could capitalize on this. Tabula's voice seemed to echo from some aged and faded memory, now years old. They'd expect some dull metabuild for a generic angel, suckered in by a few holy spells, and when they realize that it's a trap. Wham! The chipper voice of Peroncino chimed in, voice distorted due to crackling static. They won't even realize why their holy counters are so shoddy, and you'll hit him back. A fallen angel learning holy magic. Like some craven heretic seeking redemption, a certain mind flayer had declared dramatically. How poetic was the inevitable sarcastic retort that came, and they all shared a laugh. Joyous, heartfelt. So distant now. In the end, Ainz Olgown's enemies had laughed as well. It was a fun trick to be sure, but still a trick in the end. And a fallen angel investing in divine magic was foolhardy. Fun, to be sure, but not unlike an undead doing the same, such a build was not met with much success. So the guild members laughed as well. Laughed about how the guild master of the dreaded 9th-ranked guild, Ainz Olgown, was little more than a dream builder. A man so far removed from the competitive scene that the word meta was an abstract concept. Then came the hidden class, and the laughing very quickly ceased. That little joke about some heathen clinging to whatever meager scraps of divinity they could get a hand on seemed to stick, evolving into something far more dangerous from a competitive perspective. In the end, the moniker Unholy Scholar of the Divine ended up sticking, not unlike how Winged King of Explosive Strikes did for a certain other bird-brained member of the guild. Shame the multitude of barbarians/chefs didn't receive the same treatment. Then, with an innate proficiency with the entire karmic spectrum of magic, the leader of Ainz Olgown could be nothing less than terrifying. Perhaps not fully measuring up to the prestigious title of world champion held by Touch Me, but certainly enough to, with enough craftiness, eke out a win under the right circumstance. Something that has happened enough times to be counted on the fingers of one hand. Admittedly a feat made less impressive by how many times they've gone at it. That was proof. Evidence that Suzuki Satoru, Momonga, wasn't powerless in that moment. That he wouldn't be at the complete mercy of his subordinates should something go awry. So the Supreme Being clung to that feeling. That reassurance that he could stand his ground. He sought comfort in it, metaphorically clutching it close to his chest like a small child would do with a teddy. Whatever magic, whatever levels he had in this moment grounded him, soothing his frayed nerves like a cool balm. And I don't get it. Momo-chan's avatar is perfectly manly, if you ask me. I think you're all just real envious that none of you look that way in real life. A feminine voice played in the back of his mind. One burning memory clinging to Momonga's passing thoughts, singeing mental flesh like boiling oil tar. A scoff rang out, barely audible through the white noise and blood rushing in the angel's ears. Puffed. Yeah, says the Fujoshi of the group. Oh, are we tossing stones in glass houses now, my degenerate brother? Do I need to give you a detailed reminder of the Eroge incident? A near-exact transcript of their argument echoed, little more than a faint remnant of a point in time that will never come again. The din of their back-and-forth conversation, their endless tirades and complaints filled the silence of the room. And the Supreme Being could not help but smile. Their ceaseless bickering was a war drum, stealing his resolve and helping the wavering angel push forward even now, when it felt so much easier to just remain curled up in this haven away from responsibilities he wasn't qualified for. For one single moment, the reflection in the mirror that stared back at the salaryman was not one of an anxious role player out of his depth. No. In that little instance, in that fleeting time frame, however brief it may have been, the person in the mirror was one of regal bearing, a being that seemed to have been born wearing a self-assured, yet not cocky smile, one that was encouraging him, pushing him forward. At first, the feeling that he had. felt during his first flight seemed nearly incomprehensible when viewed under a microscope. He simply didn't understand the almost unnatural self-assurance that allowed him to so casually banter with Demiurge that night. That effortless confidence had rooted itself in his chest then, likely born of adrenaline, and nothing more, was never to be felt by this nervous wreck again. But now, it was but a spark. But it was there. The fallen angel's stance, posture, expression, presence. It all seemed a bit more genuine, a bit more real, and he had to wonder if this was another ingrained instinct. With an added bit of confidence in what he has and what he had, the Supreme Being gently opened the door to his room. Ready as he could be. Labyrinthine. Maze-like. A veritable Gordianot of overlapping, interchangeable hallways that twisted and turned like the bowels of some gargantuan beast. That was the best way of describing the complex architecture found within the great tomb of Nazarick was a means to deter invaders, yet it was no obstacle for the roving angel, who was so naturally navigating its convoluted layout. The process was so smooth that Momonga himself had to wonder if it was another innate impulse that had been ingrained into him. Not unlike how I fold my wings. All 6 of them. I suppose it's quite fitting for the highest tier of angel. I don't understand how it feels so normal to have 6 extra appendages. Sure, it had taken a little bit of effort at first, with him feeling like a newborn helplessly flopping about with them, but with a bit of instinct and by observing Albedo's graceful movements, a bit too closely, by his own prudish standards, the fallen angel had the furling and unfurling nailed down. His uppermost pair of wings, those jutting out very close to his shoulders, could be either folded up normally or draped around his shoulders like the world's most pleasantly silky cape. Similarly, the pair in the middle could be stowed away the way one would expect from an angel with a single pair of wings, or alternatively be wrapped around his midriff. Only the lowermost pair had a single comfortable furled state, that being loosely encircling his hips and thighs, not unlike how a certain guardian overseer handled her own pair. Being able to levitate around without actually using the wings on his back was something he had initially found to be odd. But with his current reality being what it was, the cowed Supreme One opted to not complain about such a mundane facet of this world's rule set. There were other things more deserving of his chagrin, regardless. His NPC's overprotectiveness and over-the-top devotion was one such thing. Endearing as it was at first, the novelty quickly wore off, with his entourage's constant presence becoming more and more grating with each passing hour of the days he had spent here. Especially with Suzuki Satoru's more introverted nature. With countless reassurances and 1,000 promises that no, he wasn't going to be jumped by a group of superpowered level 100 hoodlums within the depths of Nazarick, did the Pleiades and Guardian Overseer relent enough as to let him walk around unsupervised. So why was it that he was thinking about this now, as he hovered down the ridiculously gaudy hallways, quiet as an owl on the prowl? Well, greetings, Sixus Decrement. The Supreme Being had all but sneaked up on a pair of gossiping maids, all but interrupting their conversation. Escaping social interactions was not an option, not without coming off as self-important or unpleasant. As such, he had taken the time to memorize the names of most of the NPCs to ensure their loyalty via the kind, caring boss approach. Momonga was admittedly somewhat proud over how easily the act of cramming had come to him and how effective it had been. The maids visibly startled at their master's sudden appearance, which only served to make Suzuki's pride turn into shame for frightening or disturbing the cleaning staff, who seemed to be working themselves down to the bone. Before he could so much as vocalize an apology or change his expression into something more remorseful, the homunculus maids had already prostrated themselves before him. Lord Momonga, forgive our rudeness. In our infinite obliviousness, we failed to notice your approach. Sixus quickly blurted out with her head lowered, making the supreme being blink at the earnest and outright fearful groveling. "Good morning, master. This humble servant is deeply ashamed of her negligence. Please forgive me." Decrement, though far more level-headed than her partner, still spoke in a clipped tone, a slight tremble noticeable in her voice. Whether such an overblown reaction came from dreading the Supreme One's wrath or because of shame in forcing her master to shamefully greet them first was anybody's guess. The angel frowned a bit upon seeing his servants so scared of him. "Gosh, how do I get them to relax a little? I suppose being nice to them would make for a good start. I can't be too casual. I'm still supposed to be their boss, right? Please, raise your heads. There is no need to apologize." The angel spoke softly, the smooth gentleness of his voice practically tickling the ear, causing the deeply prostrating cleaning staff to stand a bit straighter, looking at their master, clearly bewildered. To punctuate his sentence, Momonga did his best to give a jovial smile, something that both maids saw upon looking up at their supreme being. The homunculi stared boggle-eyed at their master as the previously light dusting of pink on their cheeks blossomed into an eye-searing vermilion. The overlord froze up slightly, smile stiffening upon noticing their reaction. "Ah, what did I do? Do I look scary?" That wasn't the case. And if Suzuki Satoru indeed had even a little bit of experience reading others, it would have been plainly obvious. Alas, a deeper understanding of particularly passionate emotions still eluded him. Rather than striking fear into their hearts, the fallen angel's smile positively beamed at the servants, practically making the hallway brighter by existing. Fittingly enough, the best word to describe it was divine. The supreme being simply possessed an ethereal visage that, due to whatever magic mumbo-jumbo had made Nazarick and his avatar real, managed to be both traditionally beautiful and handsome. In any natural scene, beauty was in the eye of the beholder, a truly subjective thing that varied from person to person. What one individual may find enticing might not match up with the tastes of their peers. Though whatever had brought this body to life seemed to recognize the little mental post-it note Suzuki stuck onto his character that declared his intention for it to be objectively attractive. With that, the world's densest man had been haphazardly gifted a body that moistened panties, tightened boxers, and broke sexualities with a wink in some rendition of a divine joke ***. Ea, Lord Momonga. Decrement stuttered, fidgeted slightly as Sixus just gawked. Now, he chided exasperatedly with the air of a comforting paternal figure wishing, only the very best for you. Though this may have been due to his slightly strained tone of voice, courtesy of the maid's weird behavior. "I'm very happy that you work so hard for my sake. The other supreme beings would certainly feel the same, were they here." The angel's voice was smoother than silk, wriggling into the listener's ears and gently tickling the brain. It possessed a certain noble authority that compelled those who heard it to obey. There was a distinct difference in hearing and listening, and with Momonga's intrinsic charisma, one could not hear him without listening as well. Whereas Demiurge forced those within earshot to act accordingly via command mantra, one could consider the Supreme One's ability to be far more subtle and far more insidious. Merely a respectable, naturally likable voice guiding the listener, influencing their actions, and very gently instilling the idea of subservience. The maids started tearing up a little bit upon hearing their master's praise, feeling their excitement and motivation reach astronomical new heights. Decrement retained a bit of her stoicism, able to remain misty-eyed rather than bordering on a good ball like Sixus. Finally, they had mustered up the courage to smile back at their god. "Thank you so much, master," the blonde maid chirped, more enthusiastic than Momonga had ever heard her. "You are too kind, Lord Momonga. We shall not disappoint you." They both bowed deeply yet again. "So zealous. I just complimented them a little as a good employer should. Then again, I suppose I have been a bit deified. FFFFFF. all the higher standards to live up to. Oh yes, one more thing. The homunculi maids perked up, listening intently. Anything, my lord. Decrement declared ardently, while her colleague nodded along with adorable vigor. I seem to have shed a few feathers in my room. Could I bother you to clean them up? The overlord unfurled his middle pair of wings and gave them a few flaps, as if to prove his point. The maids' faces seemed to grow into a more saturated shade of tomato red upon hearing his request. Oh, of course, Lord Momonga. The maid gushed, stumbling over her words in the rush. It would be an honor to serve. Tea to clean up master's feathers? Sixus practically moaned those words. In response, Momonga barely repressed a flinch at the sensual passion in the delivered line, only avoiding taking a step back, away, due to being airborne. Ack. Please stop being so aggressively thirsty? Is that the right words for it? The Supreme Being just returned a strained smile before bidding adieu and inconspicuously rushing down the hallway with little more than a mental groan, doing his best to ignore the two maids, now abnormally passionate, bickering. Whether he knew it or not, his words had spurned on the cleaning staff even more, bolstering morale. And with Nazarick's zealous subordinates in tandem with their overly polite leader, this won't be the last time either. Not with how idiosyncratic they both were. Ugh. Whatever. I have things to do, was the irate thought that moved through his mind, briefly making the angel feel like an angsty teen again with how moody he could be at times, though the moment thankfully passed quickly. But that had been the truth. There was something important to do. Upon arriving in the New World, Momonga had been unable to still his manic mind as it bounced between paranoia and euphoria. Though it seemed as if the enhanced control of his new inhuman race allowed him to maintain his poise and remain calm on a surface level. That being said, one of the things he had done a while after meeting the Guardians was to scry for natives or invaders in a frenzied manner. The Supreme Being needed to determine where he had ended up, assuming he was still in Yggdrasil at all. Had any other players ended up where he was? Could he parley with them? The sooner this could be determined, the better, giving him and the rest of Nazarick ample time to act. Worst-case scenario would be if all the surrounding creatures were both powerful and hostile, so much so that the guild base would be left stranded in a lethal area where they could be whittled down via battle of attrition. Though that idea had been put to rest the very same night they had arrived, with that nightly flight of his. Instead, a rival guild having been transported with them would be another tough spot. Though, given the circumstances, it's a little unreasonable to think that they would disregard the current situation just to antagonize Nazarick. Luckily enough, none his worst fears have yet to come to fruition. Even if he had yet to find anything interesting, having set aside the mirror with only a few minutes of use, there was still something fun about seeing the world, even if it was done through a scrying tool. His adventuring sense was tingling, craving exploration that a sedentary lifestyle could not fulfill. Though this expedition would stationary, like sightseeing with an interactive map, with a coworker looking over your shoulder. Be it as it may, he could escape his endless supply of devout followers queuing up to serve him when simply going about his business. The same could not be said about when actually conducting work, as there'd be at least one hanging off his every word and action. Maybe if I ask very politely. So he had taken the scenic route, promenading, floating, through the majestic halls of the great tomb rather than foregoing the journey with that ring of his. Though there would be no more postponing. Arriving at his destination, a large wooden door stood, as if silently awaiting his arrival. Even if he was dreading having to interact with the more powerful NPCs with higher standing in Nazarick, the salaryman was well aware that the best thing to do was to simply knuckle down and face his fears. Running or putting it off would do no good. Just a normal wooden door, he'd tell himself, ignoring the fact that proper wood was comically expensive back in Japan. Just a door. A giant, expensive wooden door with a level 100 NPC behind it. Good grief. I feel like pond scum that'd end up tracking mud all over the carpet and stain everything I touch with grease. With a slight grimace, the world shifted, and Momonga felt gravity affect his form once more, tying his feet to the floor. His hand hovered over the door handle for a short moment, as he in those 3 seconds wondered if dismissing his entourage of bodyguards was a mistake, as they'd certainly rob him of agency by simply opening the damn door for him. Click. He hadn't even thought things through before his hand seemingly moved on its own, finally putting an end to his quiet bout of self-loathing. Ignoring the brief pang of concern over not having gotten into character, a neutral expression made its way onto the angel's face before the door could fully swing open. That which lied behind the door was a cozy room that was not wanting in size, resembling a well-decorated study built with liberal usage of dark cherry wood. Momonga might have complained about the lone fireplace by the wall being a fire hazard, were it not for the fact that Nazarick likely had hundreds of safety measures. This room, not unlike his own bedroom and office, could be found just about everywhere. Not because they were copy and pasted, but rather in the sense that little nooks and crannies were implemented into Nazarick's design. Small, practically unimportant locales added by the guild to enhance roleplay, to paint a picture of a truly living world underground. Though, a lot of it seems to have found an actual uses now. And, of course, greetings, Lord Momonga. I hope that this day has found you well. A stately voice came from beside the overlarge table in the middle of the room, belonging to none other than the leader of the Pleiades, Sebastian. Ah, yes. The supreme being managed, straining himself not to speak too quickly. The bed was indeed quite comfortable. Sebas always had a rather intense expression, one born of Touch-Me's love of the stoic warrior archetype. Though Momonga figured that the butler was capable of more approachable means, the fallen angel had yet to see one, leaving him slightly uncertain as to how to interact with Sebas. Some part of him was quite certain that practice might help. Lo and behold, the manservant took it upon himself to further intensify his serious mask, as if intending to further stress out his master. Oh, dear lord, what is it? If I may, my lord. A stiff nod came from the uncomfortable guildmaster. Is it not unbecoming for the servant to simply stand here while you open the doors yourself? To be accompanied by a maid would certainly help in this regard. Momonga breathed a very quiet sigh of relief, managing to loosen up enough to flash Sebas a brief smile. That won't be necessary, Sebas. I am quite able to handle myself, as I am not geriatric quite yet. Though the last sentence took on a playful tone, the supreme being quickly came to regret it, wondering if that had been too informal. But when the butler of steel revealed a slight smile, so too did Momonga allow himself one. I am happy to hear that, my lord, he replied contentedly, pulling out an expensive-looking chair for his master to sit in. Though perhaps not fully at ease, the fallen angel felt a bit of tension leave his body as he took a seat, feeling the comfortable support of a piece of ludicrously gaudy furniture, his relaxed state somewhat hampered by how his wings didn't allow him to fully lean back and relax. Sebas, living up to his title of head butler, set down a brilliantly polished silver platter on the table, on which rested a glass of juice. The fallen angel had to wonder how, and when he had produced this silver platter, ultimately chalking it up to being a quirk of high-level serving staff, opting instead to focus on the beverage. A tall glass of orange liquid. Momonga gave an amused exhale through the nose upon seeing the drink, reminded of the first time he had tried it 2 days ago, and how he had struggled to keep a straight face after having drank something so good after the eternal dry spell that was life on earth. Then again, it should have come as no surprise how his servants misinterpreted his poor attempt at a poker face for displeasure. Thankfully, he was savvy enough to save some poor sot from having their head lopped off for producing subpar juice. With a look of genuine appreciation on his face, the angel lifted the glass of nectar to his lips and the perfectly balanced blend of fruity flavors further calming him. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Geez, that's still fantastic. Courtesy of Blue Planet, no doubt. With how good that is, I wouldn't mind one of Nazarick's alcoholic beverages to take the edge off at this point, even if I really shouldn't get inebriated during work. Can I even get drunk? He had briefly considered eating something as well, but put it off time and again, a decision made easy by magic items and his species not requiring much in terms of nutrition. Even now, Momonga couldn't definitively pin down why he did it. One part of him figured that it would be disappointing, that even proper food wasn't as good as he remembered it, basically not being much better than the nutrient paste he consumed on a regular basis up until Yggdrasil shut down. Another part figured that he would enjoy the food, but would also damage his image by breaking down, crying in front of whoever was inevitably there to watch him eat. "This is a fine drink, sea bass," Momonga stated airily, smiling as he did so. The gray-haired appeared quite happy by that statement, giving his master a reverent bow. "I'm very glad that you enjoyed it, Lord Momonga. I'll ensure that the juicers and chefs are notified of their fine work. Would you care for a refill?"
No.
"That will be enough. Though I won't be walking around too much, being full isn't desirable." Seabass nodded in response as the Overlord took another slow sip. Besides, the glass is still more than half full. "Shall we continue our investigation today, Momonga-sama?" Seabass asked with a polite tone, rousing the Supreme Being from his thoughts. "Indeed," he intoned, hoping that his time with Ashurbanipal's thesauruses would carry him through. "I'll summon the magic mirror. You may stand at ease." With that command, Seabass gave a gracious nod before returning to that ramrod straight posture of his. The constant, overly formal back and forths were starting to become mind-numbing at this rate. He'd likely never end up having a normal, casual conversation with anybody if this kept up, which meant that Suzuki would have to slowly but surely break the ice and act more natural, lest every interaction be as stilted as this one. Momonga gave a disinterested flick of his wrist, allowing an intricately decorated silver mirror to appear before him. The movement he made was practiced, as the Supreme Being did his best to mimic how he thought a confident god would act. Something like that, maybe?
Bah.
Acting the part of some deity isn't easy, but I have to start somewhere. Like, here. This shall be regal pose number 1 for future reference. The fallen angel threw a subtle glance towards the butler, seeking confirmation that he looked as proper as he thought he did. But with Seabass' unemotional facade, that information was not easily gleaned by someone so thoroughly lacking in social experience. "Yoa. Albedo scares me, but at least she's easier to read." Swallowing his discomfort and pride, the Supreme Being returned his focus to the mirror in front of him. In a swift, elegant motion, the angel manipulated the hovering artifact, something he had time to learn not long ago. Seeing the world with all of its saturated colors, even through the mirror, was an amazing experience. Sure enough, Yggdrasil's graphics have been quite realistic, but knowing that all of this greenery was but one single teleportation spell away, it was an unfathomable thought. Great big trees, oddly adorable small ones, little woodland creatures scurrying around, be it squirrels or rabbits. At some point, the fallen angel was content to so simply observe, only making a few reserved movements to control his scrying tool. A forest. Haven't seen one outside of images found on the internet.
Ah.
That's a rabbit, that's a doe, and that's a squirrel. Not a flying one. Or I'd actually be able to meet my namesake in person. Thankfully, the Supreme Being was turned away from his subordinate, or his wide grin would be plainly visible. With yet another movement, the perspective shifted, no longer pointing down towards the ground but focusing instead on the tops of the trees. And that is smoke. Momonga's gleeful expression dropped like a stone. "My lord," Seabass interjected with a questioning tone. The overlord hummed noncommittally in response. I see it. With a few smooth movements with his fingers, the image displayed in the mirror shifted once more. PFSH. I hope that isn't a forest fire. I reckon I'll have to step in if that's the case. It was not a forest fire. As a matter of fact, it was just a building fire. Momonga's eyes widened and his mouth hung open slightly as the visage of a burning shack was displayed behind the magic mirror's crystal clear surface. He blinked, half expecting to open his eyes to a different sight.
Nope.
That was still a building, one most likely made by people.
Oh.
Natives. Burning natives. With another casual flick, the image zoomed out enough to give a proper view of the new location, which appeared to be some manner of medieval village. A lot of movement, with the people scurrying around like insects. One could even go as far as to call it pandemonium, at least from a bird's eye view. This is different. The Supreme Being vocalized a shock, and the head butler leaned in closer in a polite manner, as to not get in the way of his master's peripheral vision. Though Seabass' face was as neutral as it always was, his brow creased upon seeing what his master was referring to. Though Momonga hadn't begun deciphering what exactly was occurring, the chaos was plainly evident. No matter what way you sliced it, this didn't appear to be a normal occurrence. These are the first locals we've stumbled across, and they're dying. A bit hectic today. Momonga groused as he zoomed in to see several armored men crowd around a bloodied villager who had been knocked prone. Not a festival, then. It would appear not, my lord. As stoic as Seabass was, the Supreme Being noticed him shifting slightly, the most emotion he had ever seen on the man. An entire entourage of knights attacking this village? The fallen angel wondered out loud, considering the possibility that they may have stumbled in on a war. Regardless of perspective, there was no denying that defenseless civilians were being slaughtered en masse. The mirror granted a very clear first-row seat for the pair witnessing the massacre, seemingly responding to its owner's subconscious thoughts in order to focus only the most brutal detail and angles, revealing the sorry state of the corpses, with how broken bones pierced bruised skin and where flayed flesh ripened into carrion for the crows. Momonga's eyes nearly widened in horror, not because he was disturbed by the view, but because he had unwittingly raised the glass to take another sip of juice despite seeing a man being viciously hacked to pieces. Realizing his rather nonchalant behavior, the overlord set the glass back down on the table. That's concerning. I've already determined that my current body is affecting me somehow, but I didn't realize it was to this extent. In times of war, one could expect military fortifications to pop up in especially strategically valuable locations. Though, from the looks of things, this village didn't have any worthwhile preparations. Which made sense if whatever society they belonged to didn't consider their little hamlet important, but just outright destruction. This serves a strategic purpose, but I cannot yet tell what for. I'm not as knowledgeable as Punito Mosan, so I can't say for certain. But if this was war, would it really be necessary to butcher the local populace? The fallen angel frowned as a knight split a man's skull open with an overhead swing, resulting in the contents of the villager's head leaking out and wetting the dry ground. Should I feel disgusted? Disturbed? Afraid? I feel none of these things. It's just wrong. Teeth subtly grit, without Seabass notice. Yet another civilian screamed and pleaded as they were rounded up in the town square by the attackers. A smaller entourage of knights ran off to hunt those who saw fit to run. Seabass' expression seemed to darken as more of the battle revealed itself, a detail that didn't slip past Momonga. The Supreme Being's eyes refocused on the systematic destruction of the village and its inhabitants, the comforting support of the chair suddenly seeming less welcoming. His face remaining impasse, save for a slight twitch of the eyebrow and the quiet grinding of molars. I never saw much gore back home. A corpse every once in a while, maybe. And yet, the blood, the viscera, the screams. That's not what bothers me, just. A click of the tongue could be heard in the otherwise silent room. The captivating allure of the Supreme Being's face disappeared as a scornful sneer pulled at his lips. His newfound body always felt amazing, effortlessly achieving what felt like peak physical performance. Now, practically every joint in that body was screaming for action, like rubber bands that have been pulled taut before being allowed to snap back. It was so many things at once, with a flood of emotion rushing to his brain, leaving him lightheaded, each part contradictory, each pulling in different directions. It wasn't quite empathy. The suffering, the gruesome imagery, the silent screams that didn't carry over through the mirror, that didn't affect him in the slightest. Maybe human sensibility and old moral dregs were carried over. A rational, unequivocally right thing to do presenting itself, with the added bonus of violence, standing up for the battered populace. He wanted to step in, but this will be the first interaction he'll ever have with the locals. And it'll involve combat with a hostile force that he did not know the extent of. All while a loyal subordinate stood waiting, peering over his shoulder and observing his every move.
No spells. No teleportation.
No interstings equipment. They all appear to be rather weak. Then maybe, am I willing to take a risk? The Supreme Being's lips pursed, mind torn between disgust at the slaughter and wicked amusement at the idea of getting involved. He looked once more upon the face of his butler, seeing the clear dissatisfaction on it, thankfully directed towards the soldiers in the mirror. A good person. Those words moved through his mind as he took note of Seabass' appearance. Seabass. His voice, though not shaky, wasn't quite boisterous either. The butler immediately tore his gaze away from the carnage that was unfolding in the village in order to meet the eyes of his master. Yes, Lord Momonga? You are troubled, I can tell. Things got somewhat quiet after that as the servant returned his attention to the mirror. What a hypocritical thing to say when Momonga may have been more moved by the sight. Say something. Reassure me here. The fallen angel's mind had already been made up, but this was the first time he'd have a chance at getting through to one of his subordinates, and maybe see eye to eye with them. You are correct, Lord Momonga. The Supreme Being signaled at the Butler of Steel to continue. My allegiance, of course, lies with the tomb and with you, my lord. Please punish me accordingly if I were to speak out of line. I wish to hear your thoughts, Seabass. No need to sugarcoat or lie. I'd rather you be straightforward with me. The gray-haired servant seemed to hesitate a little bit before finally speaking. We are strong, and I believe that we may be able to learn a great deal of things from this village, should we decide to save it. Clearly, Seabass wasn't entirely sure about what he had said, but nonetheless did his best to point out actual tangible benefits rather than play the sympathy card against someone he thought was a pragmatic. The Overlord nodded at that statement. Now, they are in peril. Since we are able and do not have anything to lose by assisting them, why don't we? The butler spoke once more before realizing how his spiel may be interpreted as a critique of his master's decisions. Seabass suddenly went pale and knelt down. Forgive me, Lord Momonga. I did not mean to question your supreme wisdom. Momonga's eyes flit between his kneeling servant and the mirror.
No excuses anymore.
The Supreme Being wasn't able to fight off the encroaching smile as a familiar rush came over him, pulling his rational mind through the gutter as it had a few nights prior, when he had so effortlessly engaged in back-and-forth banter with Demiurge. Those little moments, those little sparks when all doubt was eliminated and his mind zeroed in on whatever he fancied in that moment. Whether that was a racial trait or sudden onset insanity was anybody's guess. At that moment, his halo spun a little faster, and worries were foregone in favor of simple enjoyment. Haha. Momonga suddenly laughed joyously, much to the shock and confusion of his manservant. An excellent observation, Seabass. My lord. The mirror changed, revealing a young woman running away from the village with a child in her arms, raiders in hot pursuit. With one elegant motion, the angel was out of his chair, dusting himself off as if he had recently been in a scuffle, his majestic wings spreading wide and providing an awe-inspiring sight for the butler. What would Touch Me say? Hey Momonga, you goddamn noob, where are my 500 data crystals? No, not that. Seabass, what would your creators say in this situation? The overlord asked with an impish lilt, a deceptively gentle smile pulling on his lips. At first, Seabass just blinked dumbly before finally managing to wrap his head around the sudden shift in tone. Still on his knees, his graying head was lowered with an odd look in his eyes. To help those in need is common sense. The butler spoke passionately, the ghost of a smile appearing on his face for the first time. Right you are, Momonga declared almost giddily. The room was colored a saturated azure shade as a whirlpool of black and blue tore open in front of the supreme being. Phantom winds caressed the locale, causing the veils and cloth on Momonga's newly manifested armor to gently sway. Once again, the poor manservant was thrown for a loop as he gawked at his ever-eloquent master leisurely strolling towards the gate. My lord, do you intend to act yourself? Seabass exclaimed with a voice that didn't quite manage to hide all of his surprise. On your own. The angel came to a stop and shook his hooded head. Would you allow that? My lord, of course not. Your safety is our utmost. What do the denizens of Nazarick think of humans, Seabass? Momonga interrupted the servant's whinge with a question. The leader of the Pleiades paused for a moment. They are not well liked, my liege. If that's the case, then I ask of you to accompany me. Me, Lord Momonga? Surely Lady Albedo would be able to better protect why. The leader of the supreme beings just gave a jovial laugh and stepped towards the gate, staying on the ground to better prepare for combat on the other side. You are the one who wanted to help. He spoke with a savage grin, glancing towards the surprised butler. Now, don't be long. Time waits for nobody. Lord Momonga. Keep the guardians on standby, ready at the 8 edge assassins. Hurry it up a little. The supreme being gave a lazy wave before disappearing through the portal, leaving a stupefied butler scrambling to complete his master's orders. So, my littlest knights, let us see just how far that lack of chivalric code will bring you. Chapter 2, Karn Village.
Run.
Run faster.
I
can't dash. Adrenaline coursed through her veins. The young woman's mind was a steel trap, razor-focused on one task and one task alone, to get her and her sister to safety. Even as her skirt was torn on bramble, her legs growing heavier and lungs beginning to burn. All of her weakness, all of her vulnerabilities, chased away by fear and adrenaline as she darted across the woodland. As a simple village girl, she was used to physical exertion when working on the farm, yet the sheer panic and hyperventilation still took its toll, proving that her body was not able to keep up forever. Especially not when lugging around heavy baggage that she'd sooner die than willingly discard. And so, tired legs stumbled forward without being offered a break, doing their damnedest to prevent collapsing or tipping over. Henry Amat clutched her younger sister Nemu to her chest tighter than ever before, desperately seeking warmth and comfort that might no longer be offered to her. Ultimately, she found none. Not as her younger siblings stifled their sobs by burying their tear-stained face in her tattered dress. The fear was contagious, and in lieu of falling like the rest of her village, she pressed forward, not intending to find out if the sound of snapping of branches and rustling of armor that could be heard beneath the beating of her heart was a product of paranoia or not. Father, he. Henry didn't finish that thought. She couldn't finish that though. She wouldn't allow herself to. Not now. Because really, there was only one possible outcome. When the captain of the attacking forces had approached with a salacious smile, her father stepped up and fought him off. The actual fate of the man remained to be seen, yet the disheveled girl had a sneaking suspicion of what had come to pass. Faced with a massacre like that, there was only one thing that could realistically be done, and that was to run. Taking the opportunity her father's sacrifice had granted, she grabbed Nemu and charged into the thicket, not wanting to dwell on it for even a second longer. "Hey, you Dash! Stop!" And gruff voice roared behind her, heavy footsteps approaching. Henry's heart lurched and stomach plummeted as she clutched the whimpering Nemu with greater fervor and kept running. But being tired after a day's work in the fields, carrying her little sister proving to be more taxing than expected. Henry yelped as pain rippled through her shoulder blade, a cold steel sword cutting into her back. Losing her footing, the village girl tripped, and her escape swiftly came to an end. Fear bit into her mind as the young lady desperately scrambled for a solution. In the end, she could do nothing but clutch her crying sister closer in an attempt to shield the weeping child from harm with her own body. At this point, Henry was on the verge of tears herself, only managing to keep it together due to the immense fight or flight response her human mind was going through. The village girl's breathing grew heavier as warm blood trickled out of the open wound on her shoulder, the radiating burning sensation of the injury being pushed aside by growing desperation. Death was approaching. Henry's throat seemed to close up when she realized that fact. And no matter how tightly she shut her eyes, no matter how much she held back her tears, that immutable fate wouldn't change. Even if it felt impossible to accept such a thing. Not even as her pursuer now circled her, closing off the way she had been running. To an extent, Henry Amat was right. Death was indeed approaching, just not in the way she was envisioning. "Enachum." The hoarse voice of Nemu called out. The little one was not fully understanding what's happening, but was fearful of her sister's safety nonetheless. Snot and tears were freely flowing, and the unbridled terror in the child's reddened eyes was too sincere to be faked by anyone, let alone someone so young. It's okay." Henry choked a whine to reassure her sibling, gently stroking the little girl's red hair and hugged them tighter in spite of the painful wound, but ultimately, her voice still faltered several times before she could work up any certainty in her tone. We're fine. We're fine. We're gonna be fine." Contrary to the spoken words, the village girl silently prayed, this time more earnestly than she had ever done. "Please, please, please. Oh gods. If not me, she can't dash. Not like this." Henry's mind wandered, considering all the possibilities. The rationalizations gave her no comfort. In the end, it was hopeless, with there being only one way this was going to play out. Yet she prayed to ever-silent gods. Even if she could not be saved, something had to be done. As it stood, her village probably wouldn't be the last to be razed to the ground. Not that the thought even occurred to her in this state. "Please dash." She pleaded and sobbed, knowing full well that she would find no mercy at the edge of those monsters' blades. But in the end, the village girl was willing to throw away all dignity if her sweet little sister could be spared. The captain.
He wanted me.
Father,
No.
maybe. Just maybe he'll let Nemu go if I offer myself. She can't just die like. One each on dash. Nemu cried as the knight stepped closer with weapons drawn. Henry swallowed thickly. The attacker's presence was like a pail of cold water being poured on her. Even if I offer myself, he'll still kill us. Is it useless? All of this. Nemu was crying, allowing warm tears to stain Henry's shirt. The raider that followed closely behind the other scoffed. "Lay off it, nutcase. Just kill her and be done with it. Or are you going to try to have some fun with the lass like our bastard captain?" Some part of the village girl felt a flash of fear at those words, even if that emotion was quickly smothered by apathy born of hopelessness. Normally, the predominant feeling would be shock, with so much happening in such a short time. But with necessity taking precedence, she was made plenty lucid, even if the sober way of observing the situation was far more crushing. After all the despair, Henry could muster no more. The other knight groaned, gripping the hilt of his now bloodied sword tighter. Why is it that they always run? Have to complicate things for us. The first knight clicked his tongue in response, shooting his companion a glare.
Yeah.
Just lay down and die already. I'm sure that slogan will go down nicely for the next village. You want to do the honors of declaring that? Hearing the horrible discussion between the two murderers, Henry couldn't help but feel even more defeated. But with Nemu's growing panic, the young lady bit down and worked up the nerve to speak. Please. Shut the fuck up. The man roared with a great deal of venom in his voice, clearly at the end of his patience after having chased the village girl as far as he did. Teasage wench. Henry barely managed to muster up the strength to whimper, a mixture of shame and indignation joining with her fear. To answer your question, smartarse, we just make an example that things get a whole lot more gruesome if they run and make things more difficult for us. The cruel raider put extra emphasis on gruesome. Hearing this, Henry couldn't quite hold back her tears anymore, with fear briefly winning out over the overpowering desperation and anger. Seeing this, the first knight shook his head, seemingly feeling a pang of guilt. Whatever, you buffoon. Just get it done already. It's not like you're going to make an example out of her when there's nobody to witness it. He remarked dryly. Henry, seeing no way out of the situation, simply braced herself with trembling lower lip. If I throw myself at them, maybe Nemu can run. Her mind uttered in sheer denial, having come to terms with her own death, but not her sister's. But even with the fervent rejection of reality, rationality prevailed, with the village girl realizing that there was no way the little kid could escape the knights or survive in the wild if she did lose her pursuers. Sorry, lady. The first knight spoke more solemnly now. Know that your death will have been for the betterment of humanity, so that you may die a martyr. Betterment? Betterment. How? How can this be for the betterment of anything? Bitter thoughts welled up inside of her, but she could not work up the energy needed to shout at them. But resignation to her fate wasn't the only thing mounting within. Resentment, anger, contempt, even outright hatred, which Henry believed to be beyond her not 1 hour ago, flared. I hate you. As if responding to that silent mantra, the cruel invader rolled a shoulder and stepped towards the sisters with blade held tight. I hate you. The sword, still dripping with blood from the earlier, was held aloft, ready to be brought down to end their lives. May the 6 great gods help your soul find peace. The foolhardy charlatan masquerading as a righteous man spoke over the sound of Nemu's muffled wails. Henry simply grit her teeth as bitter tears born of so many loaded emotions rolled down her cheeks. The world suddenly tilted on its axis. Perhaps not literally, but the sensation was so jarring that it might as well have happened. A strange, almost electric sensation prickled the skin as the hairs on each neck suddenly deigned to stand on end. And the sword that was about to cleave Henry in half erupted into a shower of sky-blue sparks, like a blacksmith's hammer striking hot steel. Instead of bending or breaking, however, the entire sword merely disappeared, leaving no trace of its existence. The knight's confusion grew, yet the two of them shared not a single word, instead turning to look at each other, having sensed an abnormal sensation gently brushing against them. An ethereal aura that was able to put an almost suffocating pressure on all those present. Distinct, distinguished, effortlessly superior, and utterly overpowering. Henry had never once been in the presence of nobility, yet even in her addled state inches away from death, she could tell without a doubt that the atmosphere suddenly held a regal tinge. As if her, Nemu, and the two knights were soiling the air around them by breathing without permission. Henry's breath hitched as something gently landed atop the crown of her head. How strange it was that this unpredictable turn of events managed to turn her breathing uneven and fan the flames of her panic far more than those two raiders. So too had Nemu stopped crying, though the village girl couldn't quite tell for what reason. The thing which had settled atop her head slid off and drifted gently towards the ground. Snow. It wasn't. Looking again, it was obvious enough that it was a feather. Not one belonging to a goose, duck, or any form of fowl, but rather one of purest silver, somehow managing to appear captivatingly exquisite in spite of being a seemingly mundane object. What in the name of the six? One knight mumbled under his breath as more snow slowly danced towards the ground from somewhere up high, as if winter had reared its head now of all times. Like a true comedy sketch, for necks were simultaneously craned to slowly look upwards. And Henry felt as if she couldn't breathe. Otherworldly didn't begin to describe the thing that simply stood upon the air. Just by them appearing, it felt as if the world around them was alive with sparks of magic and motes of energy. Though the rough shape was that of a human, one would have to disregard all their excess appendages to truly mistake them for one. With 3 pairs of immaculate wings like platinum, the figure's larger than life aura was suffocating. Though its immaculate form was clad primarily in colors of silver and gold, the entity also wore darker hooded armor beneath the bright robe. An absolutely massive halo hung above the being, covering the surroundings in soft light, nearly eclipsing the sun, which served as a backdrop. Dark cloth mingled with bright divine metals, creating an odd contrast that felt strangely serene. Even with her building mortification, Henry tried to catch a glimpse of the figure's face, only to find it obscured by a cloud of celestial velvet. Yet the most fascinating part of this being's existence was the nagging feeling of tangible danger subtly tugging at the edge of her consciousness. Everything about it just seemed slightly off. Behind the perfect and inexplicably comforting facade, something brewed. Twisting. Malevolent. Indecipherable. But despite that observation, the village girl felt a sensation akin to hope broiling deep within. As a serf born in the Riestai's kingdom, her knowledge of the wider world was severely lacking, often delegated to hearsay and fantastical fairy tales from her childhood. Even with that critical lack of knowledge, Henry felt quite certain that she knew what she was looking at. Angel? And yet, this was not a summoned beast. It couldn't be. In that crushing silence, the figure slowly descended, and the 2 raiders took a shaky step back. There was a form of smug satisfaction that Henry could derive from this. Should this entity prove itself mindlessly violent, there was nothing worse it could do to her and Nemu that the knights weren't already about to do. Whereas the raiders stood face to face with something that could fight back. And my prayers, were they answered? Henry, like before, could do only one thing, namely clutch her little sister closer and hope for the best. The figure finally reached the ground, as their overly majestic wings swiftly folded in one elegant motion. The first time they've moved since the angel got here, despite having been unbound by gravity this entire time. The very air felt like cold molasses as the divine entity inspected those present, eyes lingering just a while longer on the wounded village girl. I was under the impression that knights were supposed to be virtuous. The dulcet timbre of the angel's kingly voice rang out. There was a teasing inflection to his spiel, but frankly, there was no hiding the scathing remark buried beneath. Though I commend you for showing an iota of courage by not immediately fleeing when faced with an opponent capable of fighting back. His voice instilled terror in Henry, not because of its menace or ill will, but due to the air of allure it carried. It held youthful energy, mature authority, and timeless wisdom, so wholly abnormal that listening to the voice took priority over her wounds and her sister, leaving her so captivated that she had briefly forgotten about the massacre and trembling sibling in her arms, being brought back only by her injury stinging again. Why you? One stuttering knight managed to say, after plenty of hesitation. You're an angel, he noted dumbly. Silence once more reigned supreme as the newcomer gave a noncommittal shrug and nothing else. The two raiders shared a nervous look as if daring the other to speak. And noble servant of the six great gods, I implore you to. Not at all familiar. The divine entity interrupted with a drawl that made his disinterested contempt plenty clear.
Eh.
The gods you just mentioned. I do not serve them, nor have I heard of them. He spoke plainly and clearly, seemingly uncaring of how everybody present was suffering a very sudden crisis of faith, with the two raiders awkwardly stealing glances at each other. After much deliberation, one of the knights seemed to have lost his temper.
All right.
That's it. This heretic is. Cloudburst. In less than the 100th of a second the air shook, violently disturbed by an influx of tremendous magical power. Waves of immense force radiated from the palm of the stranger's hands, and with a shrill explosion, a spear formed of mist was launched towards one of the knights, like a dart out of a blowpipe. The cruel invader didn't even have the chance to scream as the transparent projectile with the width of a basketball rippled and screeched through the air, distorting light around it. Similarly, it came as no surprise how they wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack, with a full force greater than that of a hurricane having been squeezed into such a small circumference. If anyone present was able to react fast enough, they would have seen the spell push against the brash foot soldier's armored chest, instantly crumpling steel like tissue paper before punching clean through armor and innards alike. Perhaps most cruel of all was how the ungodly pressure changes boiled blood and blended organs, before finally pushing the pulped smoothie through the ribcage like stomping gelatin through a shower drain. And that was prior to the spell fully making contact with the body, mercifully ending it by tearing clean through whatever remained of the poor man's skeletal system. Henry, having seen a brief flash of something flying through the air before the night was horrifically torn in half, gasped and looked away, clumsily covering the eyes of her sister in the process. A terrifyingly tense silence, punctuated only by the strangled last whimper escaping the throat of the bisected man, was finally broken by a scream. Ah. The other knight finally lost his nerve, screaming himself hoarse as he turned tail to flee as quickly as his legs could carry him. A total reversal of roles from only minutes before. Of course, the angel didn't seem particularly content with simply letting him leave. The brilliant halo of immaculate gold that loomed above the angel shrank down to a more reasonable size, allowing the divine interloper to grasp it. Once again faster than Henry could even hope to track, the golden chakram was thrown, sailing through the air and relieving the fleeing soldier of his head with but a single swoop. Even when the halo returned to its rightful spot above the angel's head, the village girl was unable to tear her wide eyes off the now headless corpse as it crumbled into a twitching pile on the ground. There were a great many emotions moving through her chest upon having witnessed this. Of course, the dread and fear from before resurged, with a slight helping of hope acting as a spice to drive away the dreary apathy that clouded her mind earlier. Now her heart was racing once more, with the possibility of survival being dangled in front of her and her sister. But perhaps more concerning was another emotion that seemed to swell somewhere deep within as she stared boggle-eyed at the decapitated body. That emotion could only be called grim satisfaction. And then, things fell quiet. Quiet as can be with the sound of rustling leaves, chirps of distant birds, and Henry barely keeping her anxious breathing in check. It was not a small amount of terror the blonde girl felt when the angel's attention inevitably fell on them. Even with their face obscured by a cloud of wispy nebulae, she could clearly feel the intense scrutiny she fell under. Ignoring the involuntary shudder that passed through her body, her mouth tried to vocalize one of the myriad of pleas that moved through her mind, but ultimately, she could do naught but stutter. In a similar vein, Nemu no longer had her face buried in her elder sister's shirt, instead staring right back at the domineering figure that cast a shadow over their huddled forms. But unlike her sibling, Nemea seemed far more at ease, blinking and looking at the divine interloper with a mix of curiosity and awe, appearing almost spellbound. As if to undercut the moment, the biting sound of static entered into the meadow so suddenly that Henry startled. Her eyes were pulled from the flawlessly clad angel and instead found themselves staring at a spot slightly further away, where a swirling whirlpool of bright blue manifested out of thin air with a distorted roar, allowing another curious individual to step out of it. This time, an elegant old gentleman dressed in a carbon black suit. As someone most finer folk would dismiss as a bumpkin, she was unfamiliar with fancy clothing and servants, but there was no doubt in her supposedly ignorant mind that this was a butler of the highest grade. The unfamiliar servant stepped closer to his lord, an energetic spring in his step not befitting of his outward age. "What took you so long?" the heretical angel asked without the barest hint of an accusatory tone, not deigning to turn around to look at the newcomer. "Forgive my tardiness, my lord." The manservant spoke with regret, plainly evident in his voice. "I was notifying the Pleiades and Guardian Overseer about our excursion in case out enemies have taken anti-dash message precautions. Some did not agree with me alone being sent to accompany your exalted self." The Lord seemed to consider his words before nodding in apparent agreement. "Al." A slight pause. "The Guardian Overseer?" he questioned. The servant's face seemed to scrunch up slightly, reflecting some manner of deference. "As a mere butler, it is unbecoming to speak of my superiors behind their backs. Though if you are the one asking, my lord, then yes." "Can't be helped then," the angel noted with clear resignation, speaking as though dismissing the butler's regret over being late. Seeming reassured by the divine entity's words, the great servant allowed his steely eyes to sweep across the clearing and Henry's shivering form before settling on the mangled bodies. "My lord, I trust these scoundrels did not prove troublesome for someone of your power?" He followed up with eloquence befitting of an experienced attendant. Hearing the question, the angel offered a soft shake of the head, causing the imposing halo to elicit a gentle bell-like jingle.
No.
"Not at all, Seabass." Henry committed the spoken name to memory before feeling the gaze of the angel on her stronger than earlier. She now had his undivided attention. The young woman subconsciously shrank due to the sheer power of the being commanded. Upon noticing her discomfort, however, he almost sheepishly averted his eyes, looking at his attendant for the first time since coming here. R. The angel's face was obscured, yet Seabass and Henry could both tell that he had donned in confused expression. "Are you really fully equipped?" he asked the gray-haired gentleman, inspecting the fine black suit and contrasting white gloves. The old man gave a nod, looking ready to give a verbal reply before the domineering angel raised a hand, silencing him. "Yes, I'm sure. I doubt you'd be negligent enough to face off against an unknown enemy with subpar equipment." He sighed and shook his head. "Time is of the essence. You are to deal with the knights who are attacking the village. Capture a few for interrogation purposes. And make sure to keep your cards close to your chest." The butler paused, seeming hesitant for a reason Henry couldn't pin down. "I'm not made of sugar, Seabass. The crows won't pick me apart because you leave me unattended for a minute or two." The fallen angel grumbled upon seeing the butler's obvious hesitation. "Understood, my liege." The veritable silver fox asterisk finally accepted with great reverence, offering his master a courteous bow. With those words, the lord appeared somewhat contemplative, with a gauntlet hand reaching through the celestial mist obscuring his face to seemingly scratch his chin. "For the duration of this mission, you are not to refer to me by name in front of these people unless instructed otherwise," they ordered. "As you command." The professional butler acknowledged with a deep and enthusiastic nod. Looking almost eager to leave and deal with the attackers, he nonetheless awaited further instructions, correctly deducing that the angel was not done with his orders just yet. "Oh, and Seabass." "Yes, my lord. Is it not right to repay good unto good and evil unto evil?" The divine entity questioned rhetorically. "Make them pay. Now isn't the time for mercy." A beat of silence followed, with the gray-haired butler dwelling on his master's words before allowing something vaguely resembling a smile to appear on his stoic face. Henry shuddered, as the almost ruinous air exuded by the angel before came seeping back in with those spoken words. "Of course, my lord. Worry not. I shall be tending to the attackers properly." Tending to? Henry's lethargic mind managed, staring at the newcomers with slightly drooping eyelids. When did they get so heavy? Is the butler also strong? The angel. He killed those terrible people. Then maybe mother and father can also be saved. The feeble hope brewing within seemed to grow emboldened by the angel's command. Henry was starting to feel a little more at peace. As suffocating as the angel's aura was, after the acts of violence were done and dusted, his mere presence became a lot more comforting, with nary a trace of the previous lethal intensity. She was confident that this individual was here to help, to save. So was it any wonder that the eyes directed towards the creature's holy form grew less fearful and more admiring? Nevertheless, the idea that her parents could be rescued was unrealistically optimistic, far-fetched in the best of cases. Yet the idea lent her some much-needed comfort. But before she could open her mouth to ask a question, any question, the servant just vanished into thin air with a barely audible rustle of fabric. The wounded girl gasped, and the child in her arms seemed similarly surprised. Barely a beat of silence followed before the angel stepped closer, not paying their confusion any heed. Henry tensed a little. Unsure of how to deal with the situation, her scrambled mind opted to take a leaf out of Seabass' book by being overly polite. My lord. She slurred, just now realizing just how anemic she had grown. The entire back of her dress now clung to her back, saturated with blood. With how much her head was spinning and how close she was to keeling over, it was a miracle that she was able to utter any words at all. Sluggish didn't even begin to describe it. Henry was at his complete mercy now, regardless of what would come to pass. The village girl couldn't quite hide her surprise when the holy creature suddenly knelt down in front of her, making their eye levels quite even. Seeing the angels so much closer, with 3 pairs of wings practically wrapping around them, was a damn near spiritual experience. A sentiment likely echoed by Nemu, if her awed cooing and marveling at the man's elegance was anything to go by. For a moment, the Lord seemed quite stumped, as though lacking the right words to say. Or the right words to see comfort us. Such kindness after that draining ordeal was nearly too much, as Henry's lower lip shook again, eyes growing hotter at the same time. That detail didn't slip past their benefactor as he froze slightly, evidently shocked by her seemingly deteriorating mood. There. The divine scion's voice took on an air of urgency, apparently unnerved by how the village girl was barely holding herself back from crying. Be at ease. I am here to help. With a hand slowly reaching out, as if to show how he meant no harm, a glove of an unknown metal, surprisingly warm to the touch, ghosted against her wounded shoulder. The girl winced a bit upon feeling a hand, however gentle, on the open cut, though her discomfort was swiftly replaced by relief when a powerful, contact high heel coursed through her body without warning. A highly comforting sensation spread out with the injury as the epicenter, reminiscent of both a warm hug and a cool breeze on a stuffy summer day. For a moment, however short that moment may have been, everything was okay again. With the massacre and traumatizing events of the day set aside in favor of peaceful memories of better days, reality eventually reared its ugly head, but it all seemed just that much easier to bear with their savior right by them. The wound had now fused shut, and not even the smallest patch of scar tissue could be seen. Henry's fatigue melted away, and her head was no longer muddled, leaving her more energized and focused than she had ever been. At this point, dumbfounded wasn't enough to describe her mood as she gaped like a fish out of water, unable to voice her gratitude. Watery eyes looked at the angel as he once more stood up straight, regaining his imposing form. She swallowed thickly. Even with her body in the best shape of her life, Her vocal cords still seemed to fail her. Tea. Tea, thank you. She cried with breaking voice, holding back fat tears and ugly bawling as to not disturb their savior more than she already has. And because she could not afford to lose it before the situation had been resolved. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The village girl repeated her thanks time and again, desperately latching on feelings of gratitude and relief so that the grief and despair from earlier wouldn't be able to sway her anymore. She made a hearted attempt at bowing, though the awkward position didn't make it easy. Nemu, noticing her distress, hugged her harder, despite seeming very eager to get better acquainted with the man in front of them. Clever rascal. An amused comment moved through her mind, and what a relief it was to have a thought that wasn't dreary, hopeless, or pessimistic. The angel once more shook his head. Don't mention it, he declared serenely, seeming mollified by how the siblings no longer were in emotional nor physical distress. It's common sense to aid those in need, no? His voice was gentle, yet it carried with it an undeniable authority that felt befitting of a king of kings. Henry's chest swelled with a comforting warmth. Yes, Lord was undeniably a fitting title. That was the conclusion she reached as she wiped her eyes and swallowed the snot that had built up in the back of her throat, scrambling to bring her many runaway thoughts to heel. So she looked again at the greatest anchor she now had, the savior who was reassuringly looking down at them. His face may have been obscured, but Henry was sure that he was smiling ever so gently. The fierce scowl on Momonga's face seemed to grow more intense as the events of the last few minutes played in his mind on repeat, not a single detail lost. It really made it easy to appreciate how badly he had messed things up. When did I get an eidetic memory? Hey, when did I even learn the term eidetic memory? The fallen angel fought off the urge to shake his head, if only because the village girl could misinterpret his bodily language for disapproval for something she had done. And frankly, he had no desire to traumatize the two sisters more than he already has. What is wrong with me? Was the question that seemed to echo several times, interspersed throughout this encounter as he recalled it. He hadn't quite been able to resist the boiling excitement, the unbridled, volcanic hype that was thrumming in his veins when he first arrived. Though not unlike a sugar rush or some other bizarre high, the reckless urges have since worn off. And sure enough, even if approaching from the sky was a stylish and a holier-than-thou way to make an entrance, it had wasted precious time. Time that was better spent saving lives. During the time he decided to make an entrance, stare dumbly at the pair of siblings and chat sea bass ears off, the elder sister had nearly bled to death. What great help he would have been had that happened. And evidently, he also managed to scare the two witless by brutally disassembling a pair of humans in front of them. Didn't even think myself capable of something like that, Momonga groused. Really, his ability to empathize hadn't really gone anywhere. It just felt very difficult to gather any feelings of disgust or outrage when looking at the bloody mess he left. He'd merely knot his brow and internally utter a few condolences, as if the brutality put on display earlier wasn't far removed from everyday life. Maybe things would have gone better if he hadn't rushed in to deal with the raiders like an angry teen with something to prove. Hindsight really was 20/20, as they say. Momonga's expression darkened beneath the data crystal-originated cosmetic haze. A hand clenched and unclenched behind his back to alleviate a seething frustration within, but to no avail. There wasn't exactly a plan when he first arrived. Merely to deal with the attackers and be done with it, banking on the idea that the knights wouldn't be tough enough to prove a challenge. Though the gamble paid off, it didn't change the fact that any semblance of order quickly went out the window. Even nailing down his thought process during that time proved difficult, and putting it into words even more so. When all hell broke loose, a multitude of contrasting ideas bounced around in Momonga's skull like a handful of coins clattering around in a glass fishbowl. The Supreme Being really wanted the raiders dead, with his bloodlust being born from a discordant mixture of righteous fury and sadistic glee. And at the same time, some scraggy corner of his cognizance was slamming the brakes, putting great emphasis on just how unnaturally violently he was behaving. Though that rather humane and merciful aspect was quickly deprived of agency and promptly shelved in favor of him gleefully dismantling his opponents. Because the foremost emotion in his conscience when Cloudburst put that man through an impromptu vivisection was not guilt, horror, or regret.
No.
It was something more closely related to childlike wonder and delight. And so, Momonga's rapt attention was put on the bodies that lay on the ground a few paces away. His eyes immediately went to the shredded midsection of the closest body, with gore and offal staining the loamy soil beneath, the spell having viciously torn the man in two. Shoulders and head were separated from the lower body like a bust, creating a macabre piece of art. The warrior's rigid face was now forever frozen in throes of pain and anguish, with blood leaking out of every orifice. The Supreme Being looked further away yet, inspecting the other corpse. It was certainly in better condition, though that didn't say much. His head had been cut clean off by his halo, leaving a leaking stump where the skull should be. Momonga's lips pulled into an involuntary sneer upon seeing the flayed tissue of the gushing stump from all the way where he stood. You could never use the halo as a weapon in Yggdrasil. I never even thought about it. I just acted. Their armors were emblazoned with an unfamiliar insignia, offering definitive proof that larger kingdoms or organizations existed in this world. There's a story here to shed light on this massacre, though the fallen angel's mind wasn't focused on that right now. Appearing instead worried about the rather severe changes to his mental state that this recent bout revealed, an idea reinforced by his now pensive expression, had his face been at all visible. This level of gore didn't disgust him. Not really, even if it by all rights should have. Momonga's mouth pulled into a thin line when the first emotion that came to mind was one of regret. Not regret over having killed, but rather regret over having ended it quite so soon. A gruesome sight such as this was far worse than anything Suzuki Satoru should have been used to. Even then, the office worker usually experienced some panic when finding the cadaver of a beggar who couldn't scrape together enough to afford an air filter. Perhaps this shouldn't have come as a surprise. The most prominent theme, or entire premise, of Momonga's roleplay in Yggdrasil had been internal conflict, something that had merely referenced the inherently contradictory parts of his avatar. Though, as it stood, this quality has since moved on from being a fun and joke between friends and turned into something far more disconcerting. Enough to leave his brow furrowed in consternation, now that the mania from moments ago has faded into resounding shame and hesitance. Generally speaking, bouncing between cocky adolescent and wizened elder in terms of emotional states was concerning enough on its own, without the murderous tendencies that had been tacked on the end for good measure. Despite the hysteria, the fallen angel lacked proper means to cope, and was forced to chalk it up to his dual natures, leaving any further considerations well enough alone. With a sigh, he Supreme One straightened his back, with his eyes, flitting between deep cerulean and sky blue, once more finding themselves glued to the closest carcass on the ground. And after having calmed down and thought things through, they deserved it. They had to deserve it. With what he saw them do, this was probably the best outcome. I did a good thing here. He conceded internally, rationalizing his actions up until this point and allowing his stormy heart to settle. Maybe it was sloppy and not for the right reasons near the end, but it was better than remaining idle. With that silent declaration, the eyes that stared at the broken bodies of his opponents grew stony. For those two, Momonga would feel no pity. Merely revulsion. A mental scoff rang out from somewhere inside his head. That one seemed to revel in this. Perhaps I did this a bit too hurriedly? With how much he enjoyed establishing himself as the more powerful one in that exchange with the girl, would it not be poetically apt if I overwhelmed him in turn? Allow the man to struggle as the reality of the situation slowly settled in. A worryingly innocuous smile formed on the overlord's obscured face as he entertained that thought. Now there's an idea.
Excuse me?
My lord. A small voice came from behind the fallen angel, drawing him from his perverse internal musing. It was a soft-spoken and hesitant manner of speech, bringing to mind a candle flame in strong wind, as faint as it could be without being outright snuffed out. Momonga slowly peered over his shoulder, making eye contact with the teenager that he had healed not a minute ago. To his surprise, the young lady had a look of carefully concealed determination on her face, appearing far removed from the shivering and fearful little girl he saw before. But even then, she still seemed to struggle with finding the right words to say. Was he feeling regretful that he killed those monsters? Henry wondered, mistaking her savior's turmoil for lamenting the loss of human lives. So kind. I guess this is just how Mr. Angel is. Nemu and I wanted to really thank you for saving us, Dash. Oh, no need to repeat yourself. Momonga interrupted gently, with an amused exhale through the nose and lazy wave of the hand. Your gratitude is noted, but I'd actually like to hear more about the wound. How does it feel now? Because I'm not entirely sure what to do if you sustained some long-term damages due to me not immediately healing it before. The blonde girl donned a look of surprise, as if him inquiring about her well-being was somehow shocking. A few subtle nudges came from the corners of Momonga's awareness, cluing him in on her gratitude and relaxation. Undoubtedly a good thing, as he, without said guidance, wondered whether or not he had made a bad impression to garner such a response, not unlike earlier, when she had teared up. Even then, it was somewhat jarring how he almost instinctively knew what the woman was feeling at this moment, as though gaining some form of understanding the very same second their eyes made contact. Suzuki Satoru's social interactions were limited to the occasional conversation with a cashier, whenever self-checkout wasn't available, or whatever mind-numbing tirade about the weather some coworker threw his way. The salaryman's lack of free time along with a sprinkling of social anxiety he always felt often nipped any ideas of fraternization in the bud, leaving his understanding of social cues quite underdeveloped. And yet, this is different. If only it had been this easy with Seabass. Then again, that man was a brick wall. The injury. The village girl replied, with the stupor in her voice mirroring her countenance perfectly. Testing how well the wound had healed, the blonde rolled her shoulder and offered a slightly shaky smile when nothing seemed awry. So, really good, my lord. With those words, she once again gave a stilted bow, the adorable little sister following suit. And Momonga couldn't quite help the delighted hum that escaped him upon seeing this. Even if the politeness was a bit much.
Oi.
I get enough of this from Nazarick.
Huh.
You don't even know anything about my supposed status. Is this just how things are going to go from now on? That quiet verbal tick drew the supreme being from his grumbling complaints. The woman was biting her lower lip in contemplation, with the younger sibling standing by her side, fidgeting as if it was difficult to remain still. My lord, are you an angel? As soon as the question was posed, her eyes widened. I mean, truly. Are you truly an angel? The rephrasing was punctuated with a nervous swallow. Sorry if that was rude. Well, I've got the halo and wings for the job. But I wonder if you'd make the same guess if you saw me summon demons and undead while throwing around some evil spells. Momonga sighed airily. No, I don't find your curiosity rude in the slightest. He casually dismissed her concerns, being instead focused on retaining his regal bearing. Before he went on to answer her question, he shot the now relieved girl a comforting smile, only to feel silly upon realizing how his face was obscured. As for your question, yes, I am an angel, truly. Henry looked awestruck by how his wings fully unfurled with that declaration, only for the whimsy to swiftly dissipate with his last spoken word reminding her of her awkwardness. Shaking her head, The village girl recuperated enough to pose another question. Earlier, when you struck down those people, why you said you didn't know the 4 elemental gods? Do you really not serve them? 4 elemental gods? I suppose it's not unexpected for religion to be so prevalent in other worlds since it's such a universal concept, especially when it's medieval times. I am my own being. He broke the silence, sounding almost as if he was figuring out what to say on the fly. But even then there was a faint undercurrent of pride and grandeur in his melodious voice. I serve no god, nor have I even heard of the 4 elemental gods before. With that confirmation, Henry's face went through several different expressions. Shock, horror, disappointment, before finally settling on something Momonga couldn't quite decipher. The Supreme Being even felt a jot of guilt at having shaken someone's religious beliefs. As for Henry, it was a bit more complicated. She was raised with these beliefs. Religion was simply a very large part of life for many people, especially for those born in staunchly religious countries such as the slain theocracy or Roble Holy Kingdom, with few more devoted to faith than the downtrodden serfdom. And yet, there comes a point in most people's lives when their beliefs are questioned for a myriad of different reasons. Henry had grown more curious in her teenage years, enough to question even the things she normally accepted as absolute truth. Though it was never to the point that her faith wavered, her belief in the 4 benevolent and nigh omnipotent gods wasn't as steadfast as it was in her childhood. Today, however, was different. It was absurd, praying to the ever-silent 4 elemental gods and have an angel save your life, only for the angel to reveal themselves as unaffiliated with said gods. Henry wanted to laugh. By the gods, she wanted to laugh, even if her dry throat didn't allow her to. Are you okay? Suzuki felt compelled to ask, almost immediately cursing himself for sounding so lame about it. This conversation was very quickly devolving into 2 nervous wrecks sputtering at each other, though only one of the 2 parties present seemed to realize that fact. The blonde craned her neck, looking up at her savior with tired eyes before shakily getting back on her feet.
No,
Was the reply that came, delivered by a voice made raw by a deluge of emotions. Momonga didn't really have the chance to express his concern before she followed it up.
not now.
But I think I will be. Henry swallowed thickly and finally allowed herself a weak smile. Angels are the servants of the gods, they say, which is why only devoted priests can summon them. Is that a lie too? Momonga shrugged. You speak of lower angels, the ones who follow the will of their summoners and nothing more. Those are simply incapable of independent thought. But as to whether or not they follow the will of any god, I cannot say. I see, she said dejectedly, brushing herself off while cautiously inspecting Nemu for any sustained injuries that could be hiding beneath the dirt. Nei-chan, you hurt? The younger sibling asked carefully, gently pawing at her elder sister's dress with a slightly fearful expression, eyes flitting back and forth. Henry's smile grew just a little bit at that.
No,
I'm fine now, Nemu. Momonga grunted and shook his head. Shall we be making our way towards the village then? Henry's smile grew a little wider, with her perking up at the suggestion. Why, yes, please, she pleaded, feeling a bit of hope at the prospect. Nemu agreed, appearing quite close to cheering, restrained only by the somewhat somber mood. Home. A quiet cast of Farsight was used, allowing the fallen angel to peer at the nearby village from a bird's eye view. The hostile knights had rounded up the villagers, presumably for summary execution. But chaos had very quickly returned to the violent order they had established. The raiders looked like ducks from where his perspective lay, though Momonga could still see them running about, picked off by a fast-moving sea bass. Some rushed towards the villagers to take hostages, but were not nearly fast enough to outpace the zealous manservant. He could wait a minute or two, but honestly, he felt no desire to remain here, nor to ditch the 2 siblings and go off on his own. As a matter of fact, Momonga felt almost abnormally confident in his ability to defend the two girls who were hanging off his every word and action. With the level of the enemy and his massive repertoire of spells lingering in the back of his mind, ready to be used, it'd be fine. Besides, it seemed like an excellent cure to his waning patience and subtle desire to get back into the fray without letting the siblings down. Just seeing the action from so far away wasn't really cutting it. One of his lower wings twitched. Angels probably aren't normal sights around here, judging by how those two reacted. The supreme being grimaced beneath the haze of constellations obscuring his face.
Could be a good thing.
The Seraphim Guild hasn't been running around these parts if that were the case. With an unnatural flex, the fallen angel's halo shrunk into nothingness, and his immaculate wings disappeared without a trace. The siblings gawked at the sudden change, with the eldest nearly flinching back when the divine being finally glanced over his shoulder. Where once was a mist of bluish stars, an intricately carved mask of vibrant red now resided. Henry shuddered as the two massive opals that served as eyes stared unblinkingly at them. It certainly was a lot more intimidating than the previous ethereal visage that the angel had. Nemius seemed less affected.
Ah.
She pouted. No wings. Momonga chuckled, peering over his shoulder as if to exaggeratedly inspect his back, drawing little giggles from Nemu. I suppose not. Any player of the humanoid angelic races could repress their divine traits in order to pass as a human. Something like this was implemented as a purely cosmetic feature for roleplay, and to ensure that the more burdensome traits didn't get in the way of allies when navigating enclosed or claustrophobic spaces. Of course, while Yggdrasil was just a game, this feature was toggled with a simple switch in a menu interface. Now the process had suddenly become very involved, while also yielding changes that were far more comprehensive. Not only did his angelic features melt away, the transformation, if it was extreme enough to be classified as such, also altered a few other things about his bodily makeup. Otherworldly ashen hair, unnaturally bright, was reduced to a more mundane brown coloration, whereas his well-built physique that was caught between muscular and sleek became purely lithe and streamlined. Did he get shorter too, or was he starting to imagine things? Honestly, Suzuki shook his head, taking his mind off of it, instead redoubling his attention on the two sisters. It's during these times I wish I had invested in control amnesia or something like that. Wouldn't get much mileage out of it in the game, but it seems quite useful now. His eyes found themselves on Henry, quietly noting how she appeared to look at him with admiration more than anything else. Maybe it doesn't matter? If I pose as a human, why would anyone interrogate these two about my species? I could just ask them to stay quiet. Feeling a bit of amusement at the idea of such a banal plan working out so well, Momonga smiled.
Now.
Can I ask you ladies to keep my status a secret? He asked, lazily waving a gauntlet hand. Henry adopted a bit of a surprised expression before starting to nod vigorously, with Nemu following her elder sister's lead after receiving a slight pinch to the arm. Charmed by the childlike innocence put on display, Momonga returned a smile that they couldn't see. Henry would likely be quite tight-lipped, and even if Nemu let something slip, it would probably be disregarded as the wild imagination of a child idolizing their savior. The scene was strangely serene, though it was a bit difficult to think that with the mangled corpses on ground nearby. Utilizing this relative quiet, the Supreme Being unequipped a few pieces of apparel, making his appearance more in line with a spellcaster wearing a luxurious robe, as opposed to a daunting battle mage fresh off a divine war zone. We will be teleporting in. He spoke calmly. The siblings' eyes seemed to widen, something resembling anticipation visible in their mien. Ready? Upon receiving yet more nods, the Supreme Being stepped away, readying up a gate. Momonga hummed, with the help of Farsight, seeing the little faction of knights banding together into something more organized in a pointless attempt to stave off Seabass. The ghost of a smile danced across his lips, warring with the slightest bit of apprehension he felt inside. Getting involved again, huh? I just can't leave well enough alone, it seems. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Belius Savalor could hear his own frustrated voice echo in his ears. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. His mind shouted, too focused on throwing a tantrum to actually step in and help his squad. That fucking wench dash. She went and got help. This was supposed to be an easy task, practically risk-free. That bitch. It's all her fault. Utilizing the Savalor family's wealth, influence, and ties to the Merchants Guild and government alike, his father pulled enough strings to ensure that he landed this relatively cushy job, which under any normal circumstance would have been far removed from any actual threats or danger. It was simple. So goddamn simple. All they had to do was to ready the bait and prime the trap. The greatest threat to them were unwashed peasants wielding rusty pitchforks. They had no experience, no formation or strategy. They were just supposed to be herded. Things indeed worked out at first. The serfs could do naught but panic.
Scream. Flee. Beg.
It made no difference. They were rounded up all the same. Men and women. Young and old. Healthy and sick. All Belius needed to do as the captain was to issue the order and watch comfortably as his men, rambunctious and unruly as their low-born blood made them, went to work, effectively sweeping the village and bringing its inhabitants to heel. He had seen her then. A young maiden, perhaps 8 years his junior, with hair of braided gold. A true beauty despite lacking finer clothing and makeup. She was an unspoilt flower, and he decided that it was a damn shame to simply let her slip by, perishing without ever having known a man's touch. It was the type of woman whose hand would inspire young men to pick up arms just to secure it in marriage. And the idea of being her first and last was too enticing, too raunchy to let go of. If only that worthless idiot hadn't gotten in the way. Got himself killed, and for what purpose? The captain cursed the girl's father. How he had stood between the two and dared latch onto him. Belius, seeing red, had made the obvious choice, taking out his mounting anger on the man. Repeatedly stabbing away at the bruised body until frustration finally waned. Such a beauty slipping through his fingers would be insult enough, but now? That one had ran, far enough to get help. All they had to do before was to wait for the pieces to fall in place, allow the scripture to do all the heavy lifting. And now, things weren't quite so simple anymore. This situation had suddenly evolved beyond just a slight towards him. Anyone eager to make the first move?
No.
A proper and stately voice echoed, responding to the now deafening silence, invading soldiers and beaten villagers alike staring stupefied at the orator. This, too, should have been a manageable situation. One single old man to be rounded up and subsequently dealt with like the rest. That hadn't been the case, as evidenced by the multiple battered bodies, with pulped flesh and crumpled armor, spread throughout the immediate area, the majority of them dead, others seemingly alive, but immobilized or otherwise unconscious. Surrendering had done nothing, as those who set aside their weaponry were struck down all the same. How ironic it was for them to experience such a lack of mercy in turn. With shaking knees and rapidly beating heart, Belius looked at the newest interloper, a handsome elderly gentleman, dressed in an immaculate suit of pure sable black. His once pristine white gloves now saturated with blood. Even after having blocked a few sword strikes with his forearms, his clothing didn't even seem wrinkled. Most disturbing of all, the interloper didn't bother using any weapons. He was a monk, someone who had trained to turn their body into a living weapon. And he was a damn powerful one at that. If that's the case, then I'll move first, he declared, making the entire squadron of knights tense up with those words alone. There wasn't a single soul who wanted to end up next on the chopping block. In a single swift motion, the sharply dressed man blurred forward so fast that eyes could not hope to track him. And it was a small mercy that the one knight who was decapitated by a punch didn't have a chance to experience the terror and subsequent pain before the thinking center of his cranium was smeared across the ground. Ay! Another screamed, dropping his sword at the shock of the old man killing a comrade who had been within arm's length, faster than he could react. Though he didn't manage to get back far before a lightning-quick jab was launched his way, striking him square in the throat. With a slight whimper, the man's head lolled, as though every rigid part of his neck had been removed, allowing the noggin to bonelessly flop around before his body tumbled into an unmoving heap. Belius had witnessed more gruesome sights, to be sure. But now that they were on the receiving end, with him running the risk of being the next one dead, he felt nauseous. His knees shook and knuckles began hurting from clenching the blade so tightly. Another foolhardy soldier sprang into action, rushing the well-dressed silver fox with blade held high. "Yeah?" he roared, bringing his sword down in a vain attempt to split his opponent's head in twain. No such luck. Not as the old man leaned slightly to the left, allowing the weapon's sharpened edge to sail graciously by as if it had missed him by a mile. With clenched teeth and bloodshot eyes, the attacker barely had time to look at the monstrously strong monk before the inevitable right hook that smoothly separated his lower mandible from the rest of his head. As the limp corpse collapsed onto their knees and slowly fell forward, the remaining raiders could only clutch their weapons tighter and stare. 3 dead within the blink of an eye. And the gentleman simply allowed the last one to approach, rather than pursue them himself. If he hadn't had the patience, that little bout would have been even shorter. Disappointing, he sighed, managing to sound not at all goading. One could mistake the old man for a parent believing their child capable of better, were it not for the faint undercurrent of ice-cold antipathy in his voice. Perhaps expecting even the slightest smidgen of competence from miscreants, whose experience with combat is limited to the slaughter of the defenseless, was too naive on my part. Though, if I must be frank, I failed to see how you've managed even this much. When the massacre had first started, the group of knights all had varied mindsets and feelings about this now routine task. Some were grim, pushing aside personal ethics in favor of simply completing the job, stealing their determination by convincing themselves that they were doing a good thing in the long run. A few others were neutral. This was a job, nothing more, even if what they were doing was a morally dubious thing. Of course, a couple didn't share in that dispassionate view, instead reveling in it, deriving some manner of joy or catharsis from the raid, even if it drew some contempt for their more morally upstanding comrades.
But now?
Now they were all united in a sense, all feeling that same hopeless, knicker-soiling fear. It was easier to count the faces that weren't pale and horrified, as one would need to count at all. And with the protector of the innocent, rhetoric the old man seemed to herald, there wasn't a whole lot they could say to get themselves out of this situation. It isn't fair. Belius whimpered, accidentally making himself heard. He truly regretted every decision leading up to that point when the sharply dressed monk turned towards him with an intense gaze powerful enough to shatter stone like porcelain. Indeed it is not, he agreed, and neither is wanton slaughter of noncombatants. We were just following orders. One foot soldier, Lons, protested. It was a pathetic excuse, but it would have to do. There was little they could say or do to justify this raid, even if they were to go as far as to outright lie. So what Lons did was rational to an extent, attempting to garner even a modicum of sympathy from the mighty foe that they could not overcome. The monk simply tilted his head in an almost innocent way. "Oh, as am I." His normally polite tone became a lot more serious, shutting up the soldier's protest. Of course, is it not improper for the subject to pin the blame on their leader? The servant shook his head, on the subject of which, not minding the unspoken questions that were raised regarding his first declaration, the monk stepped forward. Towards Belius. "Hi ye!" The captain shrieked as the old man began closing the distance. During the encounter, the monk had managed to pinpoint him as the captain. Traitors. Belius' mind roared upon seeing how his squad all seemed to take a step away from him. Wait. He pleaded, scrambling back and getting on his knees. Please. I can pay you. Any AM. His groveling and attempted bribe was interrupted by the monk using some unknown martial art, blasting away all sound and rendering the clearing deathly silent. The monk's already intimidating aura grew even more immense, making the captain feel as though his ribs clamped down on his lungs. Shaking his head, the silver fox's scowl grew increasingly stringent. I am no traditionalist that so fervently adheres to orthodox warrior codes. Nor do I put honor on a pedestal, presenting it as a core value that takes precedence over all others like a respectable coworker is liable to do. He declared calmly, his pleasing voice gaining an edge of adamantine strength that sent shivers down the spines of those who listened. The pause was incredibly tense, with many raiders holding their breaths, quietly observing, waiting and watching. Not a single one stepped forth to stop the old gentleman, for each and every one of them knew well what kind of person their captain was, and what it meant to get in the way. Massaging his knuckles by gently squeezing a closed fist, the monk went on, maintaining the pressure as to not be interrupted. However, I believe that a warrior, even a living farce-mimicking one, shouldn't die on their knees. Belius shook like a leaf upon hearing that doctrine, panic not aided in the old man's grip on his own fist tightening, eliciting a loud crack, coupled with the sound of creaking leather. Grab your sword and stand up, he finally commanded. I have a family. The captain tried weakly, nearly flinching at the brief flash of anger that appeared in the monk's eyes before they regained their impartial look. Then they will be very proud that their son perished on his feet, fighting with conviction. The white-haired monk decided, his voice carrying not a jot of sadism, sarcasm, or malice, being instead delivered as if he truly believed it. No way out. Shakily, slowly, the captain staggered to his feet. How he avoided soiling himself in spite of his cowardice was anybody's guess at this point, though a few raiders theorized that all of the moisture had left his body through his sweat glands, even if his crying quickly disapproved that theory. Internally, he was more of a mess than he was externally, as he desperately prayed and begged to the gods he had half-heartedly worshipped his entire life to save him. And for some inexplicable reason, something did end up happening. A shrill, twisted wail accompanied the swirl of bright blue energy that invaded the relative calm of the battlefield, tearing a gaping hole through the surface of reality. Belius just couldn't help but turn around, even if it meant taking his eyes off the terrifying monk. Sweeping his stupefaction aside, the cowardly captain briefly considered the idea of the gods themselves stepping in to save him, or that the scripture somehow managed to arrive early, though that hope was very quickly dashed.
Step.
One larger figure stepped through, followed by two smaller ones. Belius' pupils shrank as he recognized the latter pair of new arrivals. That wench and the sister she had ran away with. For a moment their eyes met, with blonde girl's almost relaxed look immediately evaporating, replaced with fear. Not surprising, with how much unbridled anger the raider captain's red-eyed stare contained. Her eyes occasionally darted to the larger figure that accompanied her, looking almost betrayed. Following the direction she was looking, the captain of the knights wound up staring at the fresh-faced newcomer. Though calling them fresh-faced might not have been the right word for it. Once again, Belius very nearly flinched when his eyes met the large cerulean gems that decorated a menacing red mask. It seemed as though the unknown man had been staring at him. Despite how the stranger appeared relatively slim with the loose-fitting robe and contrasting underdress, looking mostly innocuous if the intimidating mask and general opulence were disregarded, Belius still felt a chill worm its way down his spine upon meeting the eyes of this man. Everyone's attention was now focused on the trio that had appeared through a portal, many sharing concerned glances. Though a few villagers looked relieved that the Amat children seemed alive and well, even if the elder sister now sported a torn and bloodied dress. Ignoring all of the eyes on him, the robed man leaned forward, speaking quietly to the eldest sibling. That simple gesture seemed to be enough, as the blonde relaxed, now only warily regarding Belius as opposed to looking fearful of her safety. In a similar vein, the younger sister also seemed more at ease, appearing content with clinging to the masked man's legs. The distance made it somewhat difficult to hear anything, but the older sibling seemed to converse with the robed newcomer then, possibly replying to his earlier words. The man who tried to force me into coitus. The man father tried to stop. My lord. The captain tensed up even more, hearing the respect in the stoic voice of the monk that had been ripping them to shreds the past couple of minutes. The fact that this figure was referred to as Lord did not bode well in the slightest. The masked man gave no indication of having heard the greeting, still silently surveying the area. Focus sweeping across carcasses, villagers and raiders, focusing on Belius a bit longer than the rest. A hostage? Belius briefly wondered if using the Lord was feasible, only to disregard that idea. If the manner in which the man appeared coupled with the goosebumps that sprung up on Belius' skin when looking at him were any indication, even considering such a thing was tantamount to suicide. So too was striking a deal also out of the question, if that person's servant was at all in line with the master. Nevertheless, grabbing a hostage seemed to be the best option he had. None had been successful before, with the gray-haired monk managing to prevent both fleeing and hostage-taking. And with the two girls standing so close to the master, the only way one could attempt to threaten them was with a crossbow. Had the servant not destroyed them all already? But it seemed as though the gods were smiling at him today. The village girl looked around, nervously surveying the devastation and strewn corpses of locals she knew, complexion growing increasingly pallid with each passing moment. And when her eyes finally found one particular set of remains, her breath hitched. What a fool she was, to clutch her dress and scamper away from her protector, towards the deathly still body of her equally moronic father, completely disregarding her own safety. Since those two crazy people seemed to care about the civilians, all he needed was her as a hostage. Then maybe he could slip away on horseback. With the wench in tow, perhaps? Then his original plan could come to fruition as well. With a plan put into motion, the shakiness in his knees and the weakness in his heart were both momentarily forgotten, with the captain charging forward to intercept the crying girl, practically panting as a dog as he went. Without warning, the world spun, and Belius was hard-pressed to sort out anything his senses were telling him with how discombobulated he suddenly was. It took a moment to realize. But he was laying on his back, staring upwards at the bright blue sky. The waves of panic washing over him made that much worse by how a throbbing pain and warm wetness, both originating from the back of his head, were making themselves known. Had the captain been slightly less concussed, he would have realized that something had struck him hard enough to make him hit a graceful double backflip, only to less gracefully land on the back of his head.
Ew. Egg.
Belius whimpered, dizzily trying to reorient himself and get back on his feet. He didn't get far, as something exceptionally heavy struck him in the chest, pinning him to the ground. Teary eyes were opened wide in an attempt to gauge what had happened. What once was an unobstructed view of the cloudless sky was now broken by a looming figure casting a shadow over his supine body. With a look of unadulterated fear, the captain met the lowering grin of an unmoving red mask, gaze slowly trailing down the length of the robed man's form before finally settling on the overly extravagant boot that was resting against his chest, forcefully keeping him grounded. With a pitiful strangled yelp, he frantically hit, scratched, pawed, and fruitlessly grasped at the boot that was pushing him down. But even with his full strength yanking at the buckles and clasps, or with fingers wrapping around the foreleg in an attempt to lift the insurmountable pressure put on him, neither the masked man nor the belts on his footwear seemed budge a micrometer. Something that shouldn't have come as a surprise, with how the sheer strength behind the foot had buckled his plate armor, like crinkling a shirt. Now Belius was left to flounder wildly as his rattled brain attempted to get his mouth to do anything other than gasp and dryly retch. Gah! He wheezed, unable to take a deep breath with how the dented chest plate dug into his sternum and bruised ribs.
Porra.
The pummeled captain managed, his sobbing voice now distressingly snotty. I beg you. With growing desperation, Belius forced his heavy head to move, looking around. Though his perspective was slightly skewered from his position, it wasn't difficult to see how the situation had grown even more hopeless. Evidently, the gray-haired servant hadn't been idle. And now, each and every single friendly face had been disposed of, down on the ground either unconscious or dead. Not that Belius would care much about how well they were faring in normal circumstances, but right now that meant that help wasn't coming. His heart plummeted. Mercy, KH. The next attempt at begging was ruefully cut short by the masked man upping the pressure put on his chest. An irate clicking of the tongue could be heard beneath the unblinking tribal mask, drawing out another distressed whine from the flattened raider. It's rude to pass by a guest without greeting them. Aren't you aware? The voice was glib to a condescending degree, but in a similar breath managed to be fastidiously sophisticated. Another pause followed, with nothing but the labored and raspy breathing of Belius being heard, broken up only by his pained sobs. The masked man appeared almost contemplative, staring at the beaten and messy soldier as if considering something. And finally, he spoke. Clearly you aren't in good shape to introduce yourself, so allow me to present myself instead. Ainz gaun. And I am very pleased to make your acquaintance. The newly dubbed Ainz followed up with a lilt so cloyingly saccharine that Belius nearly lost his lunch. Helplessness and horror converged in the raider's mind, fueling his desperation. With tears flowing down his face, and with spit being sent flying whenever he so hoarsely spoke, Belius Savalor kept pleading. Please. Lord Ainz gone. He choked, grasping at the boot that was pressing down on his chest. Spare me dash. Anything. I'll give anything. The money. Information. Ainz seemed to stop dead in his tracks for a brief moment upon hearing the last offer. The disgraced captain took it as a good sign and intended to strike a bargain of sorts, but was cut off by the masked man speaking again. You seem desperate, he commented, but ultimately, I don't think I should have final say in the matter.
I should.
Belius stammered with obvious stupor, to which Ainz loftily, and somehow graciously, waved a hand, gesticulating towards his left. Following that calmly refined motion, the raider's eyes settled on two figures kneeling beside a corpse. It felt as though his stomach was plunged into a vat of icy water. The two siblings were crying, but it soon became evident that the older one had been paying attention, turning her head to stare wordlessly at the dumbstruck Belius with tears still streaming down her cheeks. The blood staining her dress, both her own and the splatters that came off her father's corpse have mixed together, making for quite the sight, the disheveled blonde sitting there stained in red. So, Ainz spoke, clasping his hands together behind his back. What's the verdict? With growing panic, the captain's fearful eyes darted between the livid village girl and the terrifying man who was pinning him to the ground, though that person was more of a living guillotine at this point. The young lady blinked tears out of her misty eyes, casting one last look at Belius' desperately pleading face before turning away. He groaned, swallowing dignity. Plias. My lord. She spoke. Her voice was laden with grief so all-encompassing that one could almost pretend that there was no anger in it. But that would be a willful delusion. The girl licked her parched lips and swallowed thickly before pressing on. I cannot bear to look at him anymore. The gavel was down, and the ensuing silence was deafening. Wow, you bitch. Belius roared and wailed, An admittedly impressive feat with how little breath his compressed lungs could hold. In mere moments, the stillness was replaced with pandemonium as the man-child flailed madly. What gives you low lives, Nazarick? The tantrum was very swiftly ended by Ainz pushing down again, drawing a slight crack from the breastbone. And you are willing to grant me any request? The masked man suddenly spoke, making Belius' terrified face slacken. His eyes opened wide, staring disbelievingly at Ainz. After that whole song and dance, was he going to strike a deal now? By showing how he had no other options? That nobody else would be showing mercy? Yes. Belius hollered at the top of his lungs, an optimistic spark igniting in his admittedly crushed chest. Fighting off the urge to cough his lungs out, he continued, screaming until snot flew from his nose and bloody phlegm from his mouth. Anything. All my gold. Any title you want in the theocracy. I'll tell you Ev MMGHRGH. As if to push the limits of human biology, Belius' eyes widened further. This time into the circumference of dinner plates as a sizable bundle of cloth, produced from God's knows where, was shoved into his mouth, forcing his jaw open so wide it nearly popped out of its socket. Bite down. Ainz ordered gently, but firmly. I have no use for rose-tinted spittle. MMGH. Belius screamed against the gag the best he could, but there was no use anymore. Ainz' foot pressed down until the sternum was crushed, unyielding boot pulping the trachea with residual bone shards and with heel mercilessly goring the bronchi. With a sudden influx of pressure, the chest cavity splattered, the ribs folding inwards and piercing the already bruised lungs before introducing the bloody smoothie to the spinal column. And finally, one last crack could be heard when vertebra was crushed into red and ivory paste, with the sole of Ainz' boot now coming into contact with the blood-saturated earth on the other side of the man's torso. It was a harrowing thing to witness for those who decided to look, for the cruel raiders' muffled wails to turn into sputtering wheezes and barely audible wet gurgling. The way mad flailing finally petered out into twitching and after a while falling permanently still was a chilling sight. Belius' final vision was not one of home, not one of carefree beauty, but rather one of mockery, with a mask of envy seared into his mind's eye as the very last thing he'd ever see, haunting him as his consciousness faded into nothing. It was not a kind death, and it certainly wasn't a quick one. But, for Ainz, this served as a milestone. For better or for worse. The way Belius read, tear-filled eyes stared into his with such fear, such betrayal, before finally fading into a glassy stare, forever unseeing. He simply stood there, as that realization slowly washed over him, like tidal waves lapping higher and higher at a sandy beach. A collective of horrified villagers stood staring at him with equal parts awe and horror, eyes occasionally finding themselves gawking at his now red-stained leg. Unable to do anything else, the supreme being heaved a deep sigh, allowing the gentle wind to rustle his bloodied robe as his thoughts were slowly brought back under control. This was something that would stick with him. Not as trauma, but as the very first moment he understood what it meant to take a life. Not like before, where the lightning-quick spell allowed him several degrees of separation.
No.
He will recall with perfect clarity how bones crunched and meat squelched beneath his boot, the tortured final throes, and the last expression the man ever adopted. Slowly, agonizingly, each second of suffering serving as the axe to a macabre play. And one day, he looked back at this moment, his first time truly understanding the concept of killing. It would replay in his mind with perfect clarity. What would he feel then? Disgust? Shame? Resignation? Enervated apathy? Savage delight? Ainz simply didn't know. Not yet. But somehow he knew that, depending on what he felt, in that moment in the future, it could make or break him. Went overboard, again. Momonga's mind mumbled as he wrenched his foot free of the desecrated corpse. Swept away by the moment, again, employing a clean spell, normally used to remove dangerous substances from the user's body. He simply washed away all of the red that painted his leg, unaware of the villagers staring in awe of how his suave motion simply made the blood disappear. Stupid. The alabaster-clad angel berated himself, nervously stealing glances at his servant and the idle crowd of terrorized villagers. Seabass. He spoke through a newly formed message. Link, not wanting to be heard by potential eavesdroppers. Can you calm down the crowd? Find someone to bargain with. Request payment in the form of information. Their eyes met across the short distance between them. As you wish, Lord Ainz ol Gaunsama. The fallen angel nearly cringed at that, quietly wondering if he had made a fool out of himself in front of his servant, and that this was the butler's way of pulling his leg. Just shorten it to Ainz. A brief silence followed that declaration, leaving the Supreme being wondering whether he had said anything wrong. Is it truly all right? The steel butler inquired. Is it not improper for me to shorten such an exalted name? It's all for the sake of convenience. It'll be a mouthful otherwise. Understood. The dedicated servant simply nodded and bowed courteously, showing no signs of having his loyalty compromised by what the fallen angel deemed to be a poor showing of character and leadership. And
Good job.
Ainz commended, seeing all the invaders properly dealt with. The few that were spared having been paralyzed by one of Seabass' key skills and tied up where the villagers were once collected. The gray-haired butler's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by the genuine-sounding praise. Though the angel spoke primarily to come off as a polite and appreciative leader, his words were still sincere. I'd say you've managed to uphold Nazarick's standard efficacy.
I
Thank you, Lord Ainz. But I am unworthy of such praise for handling such an insignificant matter. The manservant spoke reverentially. Ainz sighed, regaining some poise, fake as it may have been. Nonsense. Not a single villager was hurt after your arrival, and I am satisfied. Is that not enough? He questioned rhetorically. Seabass seemed to almost swallow thickly, once more giving his gracious master a deep and respectful bow, a few confused villagers looking their way, unable to keep up with the ongoing silent conversation. Very well. Thank you, Ainz-sama. This one humbly accepts your recognition. The leader of the Pleiades paused, turning his head to look at the motley crowd of ragged villagers. Then,
please.
allow me to handle this, my lord. With but a single grunt of affirmation from the Supreme Being, the two once again parted ways, the servant eager to fulfill his master's orders. Remarkable. Truly remarkable. Seabass found himself thinking, recalling the sight of his glorious master casually pinning the bastard captain to the ground. Perhaps it was a bit much for the Supreme One to involve himself so much as to dirty his own august self, but the theatrical showing was breathtaking. The way Lord Ainz Olgown effortlessly commanded the scene, wordlessly demanding the attention of all those present. It was a striking thing. Evoking fear in the hearts of the opposition and stoking hope in the hearts of those they have sought to protect. The sight of the Supreme Being looming over the raider carried an outright poetic juxtaposition, one that was permanently hewn into his heart, with the poor excuse of a leader being quite literally crushed beneath the boot of a perfect one. Excessive as it may have been at first glance, Seabass Tion understood it. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But that was precisely it. The Iron Butler saw it in the villagers' eyes. The reverence, the respect, the gratitude, the fear, all achieved while saving the downtrodden that could not save themselves. He gave a wistful sigh, fully understanding why a righteous soul such as Lord Touchme and one with as much propensity for cruelty as Lord Ulbert would both be willing to swear fealty to Lord Momonga. The Supreme Beings always seemed so distant, so far away, and, to witness one act in person, majestic. The butler shook his head. How strange it was to feel envious of the lowly summons that were so oft employed by the kind lord. for they would have ample opportunity to accompany and bear witness to the absolute sovereignty possessed by the leader of the 41 supreme beings. Though, with Momonga's kindness towards him, the butler had to wonder if his master truly intended to act on his own, of if Seabass' personal feelings on the matter had forced his hand, interrupting some other grand plan. The servant's brow wrinkled at that idea. How troubling. She seemed so strong before. Even though he could feel her hurt earlier, the fallen angel still found it in himself to be surprised seeing the village girl he saved break down like this. For what felt like the longest time, Ainz just stood there, right next to Henry and Nemu. He said nothing, for there were no words he could think of that seemed fitting in that moment. The best he could do, much to his chagrin, was to stand next to them as a comforting presence. As Ripley's sobs grew more even, and with the blonde occasionally looking his way as if pleading for him to stay a while longer, it felt as though it was enough. The teenager began, making the supreme being force himself to work up enough nerve to hush her. Don't speak, he replied, shutting down her shaky attempts at a conversation. It's clearly not doing you any good right now. Was it? Suzuki Satoru wasn't exactly an expert on emotions or grieving, just because he had become better at reading them. He simply recalled the one time he experienced a personal loss, only to grimace and put it out of his mind. Really, that alone was proof enough that his advice regarding grief probably wasn't to be trusted. Casting one look over his shoulder in Seabass' general direction, he felt a pang of envy at how easily the mighty servant managed to mollify the crowd of peasants. It'd be a whole lot easier if he could do that. Unable to appear as anything less than supreme, Ainz wasn't able to take a seat on the muddy ground, or indeed kneel down, so he opted for a deep squat. Still, the two siblings grieved, as they should. Am I? Henry stammered again. Briefly, the fallen angel wondered if he should initiate some form of physical contact, such as a hand on the shoulder or to rub comforting circles onto her back, like his mom used to do. But, in the end, he buckled and settled for simply clenching his fist shut. F.A. father is here, but my mother. Crap. An uncharacteristically vulgar word slipped past his filter before he was able to catch it. Again, he found no words to say in that moment, simply remaining by her side. She isn't over there. The blonde's voice cracked, and Ainz followed her look, finding the largest group of surviving villagers. Henry's eyes wandered, with the supreme being's gaze following hers. Inevitably, they ended up looking at the field of bodies having been organized into rows, with some peasants beginning to cover them with white sheets. Instead of saying anything, the girl simply took a deep, shaky breath, clutching her shivering and weeping sister closer. Thank you, she spoke, for saving us, our village, and for being here. Things fell quiet again. My lord, I have met with the village elder. He has accepted our offer and is willing to share as much information as he is able. Seabass' voice suddenly filtered through the message. Link. Suzuki paused. Ask him to wait. For a brief moment, the idea of waiting for a reply, or even how that action might influence his servant's opinion of him, didn't even cross his mind. The supreme being simply terminated the connection without another spoken word. Think nothing of it. Momonga replied low and somber, the girl giving no indication of having heard him. And there they sat, neither speaking to the other. A few minutes passed by, with the trio simply remaining there. Ainz's eyes drifted, overlooking the villagers who regained enough wits to begin cleaning up. Until someone ran along and broke that silence. Gods, Miss Emma. A man dressed in drab clothing who was rushing by stopped dead in their tracks upon recognizing Henry, though their colors were admittedly made more exciting by the dried blood serving as a flare. It's a blessing that you are okay.
Aya.
The blonde exclaimed. Mr. Creetlet. In such a small hamlet, it wasn't too surprising how she knew a few people, especially those who lived close enough. He turned towards the supreme being, who now stood up, dusting himself off. And the man to thank for it. For all of us. The serf spoke, offering Momonga a shaky smile and a clumsy bow. I'd shake your hand, my lord, truly, but... He grimaced, showing off his grimy hands, caked in mud and blood. The slight spark of fear in his eyes stung a bit more than it should have. No offense taken. The fallen angel followed up magnanimously, not missing a beat. If you'll excuse me, I shall be taking my leave. Though Henry looked somewhat shocked, she accepted it, seeming not too uncomfortable being accompanied by a neighbor. Heavens damn it. It was just this morning we were discussing Oxfeed. Here, let me help you carry him. Ainz could hear the man lament the death of the girl's father, voice fading away as the distance between them increased. Through the village. Through the devastation. Past the living with dead eyes, staring unblinkingly as if they were 1,000 miles away. There was relief of having survived, sure. But the sorrow was still the more prominent emotion, it seemed. Forget it. Momonga sighed, no longer wanting to even consider it anymore. As it stood, the gratuitous violence, the absolute atrocity that the raiders had committed, his patience was softened by adrenaline and promptly shot full of holes. Don't even bother. Nazarick doesn't need to see me as weak. Deep breath. Just smile. It was easy enough when I killed the first two. Confidence. Certainty. That's all you need. Finally, he arrived. An elderly couple mingling with a well-dressed butler. Lord Ainz. Seabass greeted the very moment he noticed the Supreme One's approach, the villagers following suit upon seeing the servant. My sincerest greetings and thanks, Master Gown. The village elder, Mayor, followed up with a voice brimming with genuine respect. Oh, please. The fallen angel waved away, with a smile pulling beneath the mask. It was our pleasure to aid you. Though my attendant Seabass is definitely more deserving of gratitude, I'd say. The elderly couple seemed to relax a little. Seabass' politeness, in spite of their low status coupled with this Ainz old-gown fellow's amicability, made the situation a lot less awkward.
Yes.
And we must thank you oh so much for the assistance, Lord Gown. We all would have ended up dead if it weren't for your kindness. The village leader grimaced at the idea before allowing the troubled expression to fade, shooting the angel a smile, as if his odd appearance and concerningly brutal execution of enemy leader was no concern at all. Now, the supreme being cleared his throat. Shall we proceed to the transaction in question? Of course. The elder spoke chipperly. But your asking prices? Very kind. Will this be enough for what you have done for us? Seeing no dissatisfaction from the elderly couple, the fallen angel took on a more relaxed pose and gave the villager a curt nod. It is all I ask. The older man paused, seeming to think about it. Very well. Then, please follow me. With a hum of affirmation, the village elder led the way into his home.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.